What if the strongest fighter in all existence entered a world where strength meant nothing? No tournaments, no warriors, no honor. Just whispers, names, and people dying in silence. This is a world where gods don't fight, they write. Where justice isn't earned, it's enforced. And where death doesn't come from fists or energy blasts, but from a pen scratching across paper. When Goku arrives in the Death Note universe, he doesn't shake the planet with power. He shakes it with something far more dangerous. Because what happens when a man who fears nothing walks into a world ruled by fear? Stay to the end, because this isn't a battle of strength. It's a battle of belief. And by the time it's over, even the gods of death will be watching. Backhand index pointing right. Subscribe now, because once this story begins, there's no turning back. The sky didn't tear open. There was no thunder, no blazing column of light, no cosmic announcement that a being beyond comprehension had arrived. One moment, the city breathed as it always had, crowded, restless, unaware. And the next, Goku stood quietly on a narrow sidewalk beneath flickering streetlights. Traffic moved, people passed by, no one screamed. That was the first thing that unsettled him. Goku blinked, his boots touching smooth concrete instead of rocky terrain or tournament tiles. Neon signs hummed above him, casting pale reflections across puddles left by an earlier rain. The air smelled metallic cars, electricity, something faintly anxious. He scratched the back of his head and smiled, confused but cheerful. "Huh," he muttered, "this doesn't look like a tournament." He reached outward with his senses, the way he always did. It was instinct by now, like breathing. He searched for strong energy signatures, warriors, fighters, rivals, something that would explain why he'd been pulled here instead of home. And he felt everything. Power was everywhere. But none of it was pure. Goku frowned slightly. The city pulsed with life, millions of people, each radiating a tiny spark of energy, but there were no sharp peaks, no blazing auras, no disciplined fighters honing their strength, just static, chaotic, unfocused, fragile. It was like standing in an ocean that was an inch deep. He took a step forward, hands tucked behind his head, trying not to look out of place. People brushed past him without a second glance. No one noticed the man who could shatter mountains. No one sensed the impossible weight he carried so casually. Across the street, a massive screen flickered to life. "Another criminal dies of sudden heart failure," a news anchor said solemnly. "Authorities continue to deny the existence of." The screen cut away as Goku crossed the road, curiosity tugging at him. He stopped in front of a convenience store window, where the broadcast continued on a smaller television inside. Faces filled the screen, victims, numbers, charts. All dead. All without wounds. Goku leaned closer, brow furrowing. "Heart failure," he whispered. "All of them." A man beside him scoffed nervously. "You living under a rock or something? It's Kira." "Kira," Goku repeated. The man glanced around, lowering his voice. "You don't say that name out loud. People die for less." Goku straightened, startled. "Die from what?" The man laughed, but it was hollow, afraid. "That's the thing, nobody knows." He walked away quickly, as if proximity itself were dangerous. Goku watched him go, unease creeping into his chest. He turned back to the screen. More names, more dates, more quiet deaths. No battles, no resistance, just endings. "This world's weird," Goku murmured. He closed his eyes and focused again, pushing his senses deeper this time, not for strength but for intent, anger, malice, bloodlust. And there it was. Not one source. Thousands. Fear. It hung over the city like fog, seeping into every alley, every apartment, every heartbeat. People weren't afraid of monsters or invasions or war. They were afraid of being noticed. Afraid of being named. Goku opened his eyes slowly. Back home, fear came from overwhelming power. Tyrants, gods, beasts who ruled by force. But this was different. There was no visible enemy, no roaring villain to punch, no clear injustice to challenge. Death here didn't roar. It whispered. He walked until the city thinned, guided by instinct more than direction. The sky darkened as evening settled in. Somewhere above him, unseen eyes watched through cameras mounted on poles and buildings. Goku felt them not as threats, but as something invasive. He stopped beneath an overpass, the sound of traffic echoing overhead. A group of teenagers huddled nearby, laughing too loudly, joking too hard. One of them shoved another playfully. Careful, Kira might be watching. The laughter died instantly. Goku stepped closer. Hey, he said kindly, who's Kira? They stared at him like he'd asked who gravity was. You serious? One asked. He's God. Another shook his head. No, he's justice. No, a third whispered. He's death. They scattered moments later, leaving Goku alone with the echo of their words. God, justice, death. All assigned to something that didn't even fight. Goku sat on the concrete, elbows on his knees, staring at his hands. These hands had fought demons, tyrants, beings who could erase universes. He died more times than most people could imagine, and every time he'd come back stronger, clearer. But here, strength didn't matter. How do you fight something that doesn't show up? High above, unseen by human eyes, a creature hovered in the air, skeletal, grinning, bored. Ryuk tilted his head, red eyes fixed on the strange man below. Well now, the Shinigami chuckled softly. You're new. Goku suddenly looked up, eyes locking onto Ryuk's position. Ryuk froze. Zlo. Goku squinted, then waved cheerfully. Hey. You hiding up there. Ryuk's grin widened, equal parts amused and unsettled. You can see me. Yeah, Goku replied easily. You've got a really weird energy. Interesting, Ryuk thought, very interesting. Back on the ground, Goku stood, stretching his arms behind his back. He didn't know why he was here yet. He didn't know who Kira was, or why people feared a name more than a fist. But one thing was clear. This world wasn't ruled by strength. It was ruled by belief. And somewhere, someone believed themselves to be a god. Goku smiled faintly, not excited, not angry. Just curious. Well, he said softly, stepping forward into the city lights, guess I should figure this place out. Above him, Ryuk laughed. Far away, in a quiet room filled with screens and scribbled notes, a young man named Light Yagami paused mid-thought. For the first time since becoming Kira, something felt wrong. And the game had just begun. Light Yagami had always trusted in certainty. From the moment the notebook fell into his hands, the world had obeyed him. Criminals died, patterns formed, fear spread exactly as calculated. Every name written became proof, not just of power, but of correctness. The death note didn't hesitate. It didn't question morality. It delivered results. Until today. Light stood in his room, curtains drawn, the glow of multiple monitors reflecting off his calm, calculating eyes. On one screen, global crime statistics continued their familiar downward slope. On another, a news feed quietly reported the sudden appearance of an unidentified foreign man wandering through Tokyo, caught on several traffic cameras. Spiky hair, orange clothing, smiling. Light's fingers paused above the keyboard. Interesting, he murmured. Ryuk lounged upside down in the air, chewing on an apple. You felt it too, didn't you? Light didn't look up. That man doesn't belong here. Ryuk grinned. Oh, he definitely does. Light replayed the footage again. The man stopped in the middle of a crowded street to help an elderly woman cross. No fear, no hesitation. He laughed when people stared. He looked genuine. That alone made him dangerous. This world, Light said quietly, doesn't allow anomalies. Ryuk chuckled. That's funny, coming from you. Light ignored him. He stood, walked to his desk, and opened the death note. The pages rustled softly, a sound that had become synonymous with destiny itself. If he's human, Light reasoned, he dies. If he was, then Light needed to know. He picked up his pen. Son Goku. The name felt strange in his hand, foreign even to the notebook. Light hesitated for only a fraction of a second before writing carefully, deliberately. Son Goku, heart attack. 40 seconds passed. Light counted them without looking at the clock. He didn't need to. 30, 20, 10. Nothing happened. Light's pen froze. On the monitor, Goku sat on the steps of a closed ramen shop, laughing with the owner as if they were old friends. He slurped noodles noisily, entirely unconcerned with death, destiny, or gods. Light stared. That's impossible. Ryuk leaned forward, eyes gleaming. That's new. Light flipped to another page and wrote again, this time with precision. Son Goku dies peacefully in his sleep. Again, nothing. His heartbeat quickened not from fear but from disbelief. The death note did not fail, ever. Even when victims resisted, even when fate twisted, the outcome was absolute. Unless... Light's eyes narrowed. Ryuk, read the rules. Ryuk lazily flipped invisible pages in his mind. Name and face required. Human target. Cause of death valid. No contradictions. Light slammed the notebook shut. Then why is he alive? Ryuk shrugged. Maybe he's not human. Light's gaze hardened. Everything dies. Gods die. Shinigami die. There is no such thing as an exception. Ryuk floated closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. Or maybe he's not from here. That thought sent a chill through Light, not fear but offense. Jurisdiction. The death note had rules, limits imposed not by morality, but by reality itself. If this man's existence wasn't fully bound to this universe's laws, then Light's authority didn't reach him. And that was unacceptable. Across the city, Goku finished his meal and bowed gratefully. Thanks, that was really good. The shop owner laughed nervously. You're a strange guy. Goku grinned. Yeah, I get that a lot. As he stepped back onto the sidewalk, he felt something brush against his awareness. Not danger, not malice. Intent. Someone had tried to do something to him. He paused, looking around. He said softly. That felt weird. Nothing else happened. No pain, no pressure, just a faint ripple, like a rock skipping across water and sinking without a splash. Back in his room, Light paced slowly. So, he said, voice controlled but sharp, this man exists outside my system. Ryuk laughed. Looks that way. Light stopped at the window, staring down at the city he ruled through fear. Then worse than a criminal. Ryuk raised an eyebrow. Worse than L. Light's reflection stared back at him, calm, perfect, righteous. He's a variable. A world built on absolute justice could not tolerate uncertainty. If people learned someone existed beyond Kira's judgment, fear would crack, faith would weaken, order would unravel. Goku wasn't just immune. He was proof that Kira wasn't absolute. And Light couldn't allow that. Meanwhile, Goku wandered into a quiet park as night settled in. The city lights glittered like stars below the horizon. He sat on a bench, hands folded behind his head, looking up at the sky. This place feels heavy, he said aloud, like everyone's scared all the time. Ryuk appeared beside him without warning, feet dangling inches above the ground. You don't belong here, Ryuk said cheerfully. Goku turned, unsurprised. Oh hey, you're that guy from earlier. Ryuk laughed loudly. Most humans scream. Why would I scream? Goku asked. You're not attacking me. Ryuk's grin widened. You're fun. They sat in silence for a moment, the city humming around them. Hey, Goku said. Someone tried to do something bad to me just now. Ryuk snorted. Yeah, that would be Kira. Kira, Goku repeated. That name again. He writes names, Ryuk said casually, and people die. Goku frowned, not confused, but disappointed. Without fighting. No fighting. No chance to change, Goku pressed. Ryuk shook his head. Once the name's written, that's it. Goku looked down at his hands again. Strong hands, calloused, honest. That's not right, he said quietly. High above them, unseen, surveillance cameras captured every movement. Somewhere behind screens and data, Light watched as Ryuk sat beside the anomaly he could not kill. Light's fingers clenched. For the first time since becoming Kira, the notebook had refused him. Not because he lacked power, but because power had limits. And somewhere in the city, walking freely beneath the same sky, was a man who didn't even know he'd just survived a god's judgment. Light smiled slowly, dangerously. Fine, he whispered to himself, if the notebook can't touch you, I will. And for the first time, Kira wasn't planning an execution. He was planning a confrontation. Ryuk had watched humans for centuries. He had seen them beg, he had seen them scream, he had seen them cling to life with bloodied fingers even when death had already written their name. Fear was always the same. Different faces, different excuses, but the same desperation in their eyes when they realized the end was no longer theoretical. That was why Ryuk liked the Death Note. Not for justice, not for power. For reactions. But the man called Goku ruined that expectation the moment Ryuk decided to follow him. Goku walked through the city at night like someone on vacation. His steps were light, his posture relaxed. He stopped to stare at vending machines as if they were miracles of engineering. He laughed when a cat darted across the street. He waved at strangers who looked away too quickly. No paranoias. No fear. Ryuk floated behind him, invisible to the world, crimson eyes fixed on the impossible calm radiating from the man's soul. You know, Ryuk said lazily, most people get nervous when they feel watched. Goku didn't slow down. Oh, I noticed you a while ago. Ryuk grinned and you're not trying to hurt me, Goku said simply, so it's fine. Ryuk blinked. That was new. They stopped at a pedestrian bridge overlooking traffic. Goku leaned against the railing, watching headlights blur into glowing rivers below. Ryuk hovered upside down beside him, wings folding slightly. You don't know what I am, Ryuk said. Goku shrugged. You kind of feel like King Yema, but different. Ryuk burst out laughing. Oh, that's rich, I'm a god of death. Goku nodded slowly. Yeah, that makes sense. No fear spike, no adrenaline, no instinctive defensive stance. Just acceptance. Ryuk's laughter faded. You're supposed to react. Why? Goku asked. You haven't done anything yet. Ryuk studied him carefully. This wasn't ignorance. This wasn't denial. Goku wasn't pretending to be brave. He simply didn't care. Do you know how humans usually react when they meet me? Ryuk asked. They scream, Goku guessed. They beg, Ryuk corrected. They bargain. They promise things they do mean. They ask why. They ask how long. They ask if there's a way out. Goku tilted his head. Is there? Ryuk hesitated. No, he said finally. Goku smiled faintly. Then what's the point of worrying? The words landed heavier than any scream ever had. Ryuk drifted higher, wings rustling uneasily. You've never died, have you? Goku laughed. Oh, lots of times. Ryuk froze. What? Yeah, Goku said casually. First time was kinda scary. After that, not so much. You meet some interesting people. Ryuk stared at him. You're lying. Goku shook his head. Nope, dying's not the end where I come from, it's just a door. That sentence echoed through Ryuk's mind. A door. Ryuk had always known death as a finish line, a full stop, a certainty that even gods respected. Shinigami existed because death was inevitable. Their power came from the finality of it. But this man spoke of it like a hallway. You're telling me, Ryuk said slowly, that death doesn't stop you. Goku looked up at the stars barely visible through the city glow. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Depends on what you still have to do. Ryuk felt something unfamiliar twist in his chest. Doubt. They continued walking. Goku bought food from street vendors. He helped a drunk man find his way home. He laughed at a terrible comedy show playing on a storefront TV. Every time a sudden death appeared on the news, Goku grew quieter, not afraid, but sad. You feel that, Ryuk observed. Yeah, Goku said, people dying like that without a fight, without a chance, that's not fair. Ryuk scoffed, fair doesn't exist. Goku stopped and turned to face him fully. It does where I come from. The conviction in his voice was absolute, not arrogant, not loud. Certain. Ryuk felt something shift again. For centuries, he had believed humans were toys, predictable, fragile, amusing in their panic. But this one treated death like a conversation, not a threat. So, Ryuk said, trying to recover his usual tone, if someone wrote your name in a death note, you wouldn't care. Goku thought for a moment. I'd care about why they did it. Ryuk narrowed his eyes, not about dying. No, Goku replied, I'd want to understand them first. That answer disturbed Ryuk more than any defiance could have. They stopped near a riverbank where the city noise softened. Goku sat cross-legged on the grass. Ryuk hovered above the water, reflection rippling beneath him. You know, Ryuk said quietly, humans worship death because they can't escape it. Goku smiled. Maybe that's why they're so scared. And you? I don't worship it, Goku said. I respect it, but I don't let it decide how I live. Ryuk stared at him for a long time. Light Yagami believed death made him a god. But Goku treated it like a rule he'd already learned how to live with. Somewhere far away, Light studied footage of Goku walking through the city with an invisible companion, unaware that the god of death beside him was no longer laughing. Ryuk, for the first time in centuries, wasn't entertained. He was curious. And for the first time since his existence began, a Shinigami wondered something dangerous. If death wasn't absolute, then what was he? Above the river, Ryuk watched Goku laugh at something trivial and felt a crack form in a truth he had never questioned. And that crack, small as it was, would eventually split the world wide open. Light Yagami had prepared for this meeting with surgical precision. He had studied footage of Goku for days, every laugh, every careless smile, every moment where the man's impossible strength surfaced without effort. Light cataloged it all, convinced that behind the simplicity was ambition. There had to be. No one possessed that much power without craving something. Power always demanded purpose. And purpose could be controlled. They met in a quiet park at sunset, the kind of place where families lingered and joggers passed without suspicion. Light chose it deliberately, neutral ground, no shadows, no fear triggers, no theatrics. Goku sat on a bench feeding crumbs to pigeons, smiling as they fluttered around his feet. Light approached calmly, confidence wrapped in politeness. Goku, right? Goku looked up, eyes bright. Yep, you're Light. Ryuk said you were really smart. Light froze for half a second. Ryuk hadn't warned him Goku could see through veils so easily. I'm impressed, Light said smoothly, sitting beside him. Most people don't notice Ryuk. Goku shrugged. He's loud in a quiet way. Light smiled thinly. This man didn't speak like a fool. He spoke like someone unconcerned with sounding impressive. That's actually why I wanted to talk, Light continued. You're different, strong, honest, not corrupted by this world yet. Goku tilted his head. Yet. Light leaned forward, lowering his voice. This world is broken. Heroes lie. Criminals thrive. Innocent people suffer. I'm fixing that. Goku nodded slowly, listening. Light's eyes gleamed. Imagine a world without fear, without crime, a world where people live knowing justice is absolute. Goku looked out at the park. Children laughed. A couple argued quietly. A dog tugged at its leash. Sounds quiet, Goku said. Light blinked. Quiet is good. No, Goku replied gently. Quiet like that usually means people are scared to speak. Light felt irritation spark, but he smothered it instantly. "You don't understand yet," he said, "but you could. With your strength and my vision, we could end suffering permanently." Goku turned to face him. "What happens to people who mess up?" "They die," Light said without hesitation. "That's the price of peace." "Joe." Goku frowned, not angrily, but sadly. "What about people who want to get better?" "They don't deserve the chance," Light snapped, then quickly softened his tone. "Some things can't be forgiven." Goku was quiet for a long moment. The pigeons scattered as a breeze passed through. "You really want to win, don't you?" Goku asked. Light straightened. "Of course, winning is justice." "That's where we're different," Goku said. Light felt something shift in the air, not power but certainty. "I don't want to win," Goku continued. "I want to understand." Light stared at him. "Understand what?" "Why you're hurting," Goku said simply. The words hit harder than any accusation. Light laughed sharply. "I'm not hurting, I'm enlightened." Goku shook his head. "You're lonely." Silence fell between them. Light stood abruptly. "You think you can psychoanalyze me?" "No," Goku replied calmly. "I can feel it. You carry a lot of anger, and you're using justice to hide it." Light's smile cracked. "You think you're above desire," Light said coldly. "You don't want power, glory, legacy." Goku thought for a moment. "I like fighting strong people. I like protecting my friends. I like eating good food." "That's it," Light demanded. "Yeah," Goku said with a grin. "That's enough." Light felt his control slipping, and panic followed close behind. "How can someone with your power be so empty?" Light hissed. Goku stood up, towering slightly over him, not threatening, just present. "I'm not empty, I'm full." Light recoiled internally. That wasn't humility, that was something worse. "Contentment." "You could rule this world," Light said desperately. "You could be a god." Goku laughed loud and genuine. "I've met gods, they're just people with bigger jobs." Light's fists clenched. "You don't want anything." Goku met his gaze. "I want you to stop hurting people." Light's composure shattered. "You don't get to judge me." "I'm not," Goku said softly. "I'm asking you to talk." That was when Light realized the truth. Manipulation didn't work on someone who wasn't chasing anything. Fear didn't work on someone who had died and returned. Temptation didn't work on someone already satisfied. Light stepped back, heart racing. "You're dangerous." Goku nodded. "So are you, but you don't have to be." For the first time since discovering the Death Note, Light felt small. Not threatened, irrelevant. As Goku walked away, waving to a child who waved back, Light stared after him, mind spiraling. This man couldn't be controlled. Couldn't be corrupted. Couldn't even be provoked. And worse, he couldn't be judged. From the shadows, Ryuk watched Light's perfect plan collapse, not through resistance, but indifference. And Light Yagami understood something terrifying. You can't dominate a man who doesn't want to win. And you can't rule a world where someone like Goku exists. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the park. And for the first time, Kira felt truly powerless. L did not believe in miracles. He believed in patterns, probabilities, and human error. Everything, every crime, every lie, every god complex, collapsed eventually under the weight of logic. That was how Kira would fall. Until the numbers stopped behaving. It began subtly, too subtly for anyone but L to notice. Deaths attributed to Kira continued, but something around them was wrong. Criminals who should have died didn't. Others turned themselves in without prompting. Violent incidents dissolved into peaceful resolutions that made no sense statistically. It wasn't randomness. It was interference. L sat hunched before his screens, dark circles under his eyes, fingers steepled as graphs scrolled endlessly, heat maps pulsed, probability trees fractured. Every anomaly had one common point: a moving center. A man with spiky hair, ridiculous clothes, and no digital footprint worth mentioning. Goku. El whispered the name aloud once, just to hear it. This is not human error, El muttered. This is distortion. He pulled up footage, grainy street cameras, bystander videos, news clips, Goku laughing with children, Goku eating absurd amounts of food, Goku standing in the background of violent situations that never turned violent. Crime simply stopped near him. Not because he intervened. Because something about his presence rewrote outcomes. Interesting, El said, eyes narrowing. You don't remove variables, you absorb them. Watari entered quietly, setting down tea. You've been awake for 30 hours. Yes, El replied, not looking away, and the universe has developed a blind spot. Watari paused, pardon. El enlarged a probability map. Every model collapses here. Cause and effect chains fail. Criminal intent decays without stimulus. Watari leaned closer. You're saying he influences people subconsciously. El shook his head. No, subconscious influence implies intent. He tapped the screen. This is passive. Watari frowned. Then what is he? El's fingers tightened. An impossible variable. He cross-referenced Goku's movements with Kira's kills. Light Yagami's patterns faltered whenever Goku was nearby. Hesitation spikes, delayed actions, missed opportunities. Even Kira, god of a new world, seemed distracted. El's heartbeat quickened. Kira fears exposure, El said, but this is something else. He pulled another file, witness statements, inconsistent, emotional, people describing Goku as calming, reassuring, familiar. As if they had known him their entire lives. El felt a rare flicker of unease. This man doesn't impose morality, El whispered. He reminds people they already have it. Watari hesitated. Is that dangerous? El stared at the screen, eyes reflecting Goku's smiling face. To someone like Kira, El replied, extremely. Light believed himself to be the axis of justice, the center of the world's correction. But Goku created a different center, one that didn't demand obedience. El realized something unsettling. If Kira ruled through fear, and El fought through reason, then Goku existed outside both. A factor not governed by law, logic, or manipulation. El began running deeper simulations, ones he had never needed before, multi-dimensional modeling, hypothetical non-human cognition. Every result converged on the same conclusion. This presence did not originate here. Not extraterrestrial in the conventional sense. Extra-contextual. This isn't a god, El murmured. Gods require belief. Watari's voice was quiet. Then what is he? El paused. A constant, he said, dropped into a closed system. He leaned back, rubbing his thumb against his lip. Enclosed systems don't survive that. El initiated a private directive, unofficial, unlogged. Observation only. No engagement. No tests. No provocation. Because something else troubled him more than the math. Goku wasn't hiding. He wasn't watching from shadows. He walked openly, laughed loudly, lived honestly. And nothing about that behavior aligned with power-hungry entities. Which meant his restraint was real. And that was terrifying. El stared at the screen as Goku waved at a passerby, who waved back, smiling. This man could break the board, El said quietly. Watari asked the question El couldn't avoid. Then what do we do? El's eyes darkened. We do nothing, he replied, and we pray Kira doesn't force him to move. Because if Goku ever chose to act, not out of strategy, but out of kindness or conviction, Then justice, law, and even death itself might lose their meaning. And for the first time in his life, El was not certain logic would survive the encounter. The conversation had shifted. What began as Light's careful probing had transformed into something far more unsettling, a philosophical discussion with someone who refused to react the way Light expected. Goku sat across from him in the modest cafe, his expression no longer confused or distracted, but focused in a way that made Light's pulse quicken despite himself. The Saiyan had stopped asking questions about the notebook or the mechanics of killing. Instead, he'd gone quiet, listening with an intensity that felt almost physical, as if he were studying Light the same way he might study an opponent's fighting style before a match. Light leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin, watching Goku's face for any sign of judgment, anger, or moral outrage. He'd explained Kira's ideology carefully, laying out the logic piece by piece, the corruption of the justice system, the way criminals escaped punishment through technicalities and wealth, the cycle of violence that perpetuated itself because society was too weak to break it. He'd painted a picture of a world drowning in crime, where the innocent suffered while the guilty walked free, and how Kira had emerged as the only force capable of changing that fundamental equation. He'd spoken of deterrence, of the reduction in crime rates worldwide, of families who could sleep safely for the first time in years because they knew Kira was watching. And Goku had listened, really listened, not with the dismissive patience of someone waiting for their turn to argue, but with genuine consideration. His dark eyes never left Light's face, and occasionally he'd nod slightly, as if acknowledging a point that resonated. Light found himself elaborating more than he'd intended, his voice taking on the passionate edge he usually reserved for his private moments with Ryuk, when he allowed himself to fully embrace the grandiosity of his vision. He spoke of the new world he was creating, a world without war, without senseless violence, where people would govern themselves out of respect for life rather than fear of inadequate punishment. A paradise, essentially, built on the foundation of fear, but sustained by humanity's better nature once that fear had done its work. When Light finally finished, silence settled over the table like snow. The ambient noise of the cafe, the hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of other conversations, the clink of cups on saucers seemed distant, irrelevant. Goku's expression was thoughtful, his brow slightly furrowed in that way that made him look far more intelligent than his usual demeanor suggested. Light waited, muscles tense beneath his carefully relaxed posture, for the inevitable objection. For Goku to declare that killing was wrong, that no one had the right to play God, that justice couldn't be built on murder, all the predictable moral platitudes Light had heard 1,000 times in his own head and dismissed with cold logic. But Goku didn't say any of that. Instead, he tilted his head slightly and said, "So you're trying to make people good by making them scared to be bad." His tone wasn't accusatory, it was contemplative, almost curious. "And you think that'll stick, even after you're gone?" The question caught Light off guard, not because it was hostile, but because it was practical. Goku wasn't attacking the morality of the plan, he was questioning its sustainability. Light felt something uncomfortable twist in his chest, a sensation he refused to identify as doubt. "The fear creates the behavior," he explained, his voice steady and professorial. "But eventually, that behavior becomes habit, becomes culture. Children will grow up in a world where crime is simply unthinkable, where the association between wrongdoing and death is so deeply ingrained that it operates at an instinctive level. After a generation, maybe two, the fear won't even be necessary anymore. It'll simply be how the world works." Goku absorbed this, his fingers drumming lightly on the table in an unconscious rhythm. "Kind of like training," he mused. "When I was a kid, Master Roshi used to make us do all these crazy exercises. Delivering milk in the morning, dodging bees, plowing fields with our bare hands. It seemed weird at the time, but it built something in us that stuck. Even now, I train because I want to, not because someone's making me." He paused, his eyes focusing on something beyond the cafe walls, perhaps seeing memories Light couldn't access. "But that's different, isn't it? Because Roshi didn't kill us if we failed. He just believed we could do better." There was no judgment in the observation, but Light felt defensive nonetheless. "The situations aren't comparable," he said, a slight edge creeping into his voice. "You were learning to be stronger. I'm teaching humanity to be better. The stakes are infinitely higher, and the students are infinitely more resistant to change. Criminals don't want to reform, they want to continue exploiting the weak. The corrupt don't voluntarily relinquish power. Force is the only language they understand, and finality is the only force that can't be negotiated with or corrupted." Goku nodded slowly, and that simple gesture made Light more nervous than any argument could have, because Goku wasn't disagreeing, he was considering. "I've fought a lot of really bad people," Goku said after a moment. "Guys who wanted to test. Roy planets enslave entire races, kill for fun. Frieza, Cell, Majin Buu. These weren't people you could talk down or convince to change. They had to be stopped, and sometimes that meant killing them." His expression grew more somber. "I always tried to find another way first. Always hoped they might change, might choose to be better. But yeah, sometimes the only choice was to end it." Light leaned forward slightly, sensing an opening, an ally in the most unexpected place. "Exactly. You understand necessity. You've made the hard choices when the situation demanded it. What I'm doing is no different, just on a larger scale. Instead of waiting for a Frieza to emerge and destroy countless lives before finally being stopped, I'm preventing those tragedies before they happen. I'm eliminating the threat at its source." But Goku's next words deflated that surge of satisfaction. "The difference is, I was always defending someone, fighting to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. And even then, killing wasn't the goal. It was just what happened when there was no other choice left." He looked directly at Light, and there was something ancient in his eyes, something that spoke of battles and losses Light could never fully comprehend. "What you're doing, it sounds like killing is the first choice, the main tool. And that feels different to me, even if I can't quite explain why." The observation hung between them, neither condemnation nor endorsement, just a simple statement of perception. Light felt his jaw tighten. He wanted to argue, to explain the countless hours he'd spent considering alternatives, the way he'd exhausted every other possibility before accepting the necessity of the Death Note. But something in Goku's steady gaze made him hesitate. This wasn't someone who could be convinced through rhetoric or logic. Goku operated on a different frequency entirely, one based on instinct and feeling rather than rational analysis. "You said you don't judge people for fighting," Light said carefully, changing tactics. "That you just want to test yourself against them, see who's stronger. So why would this be any different? I'm fighting too, just in a different arena with different weapons. My battlefield is society itself, and my strength comes from my intellect rather than my fists, but it's still a fight for the future of this world." Goku's expression shifted, becoming more thoughtful. "That's true, I guess. I do love a good fight, and I don't usually worry too much about why someone became strong, just that they did." He scratched his head, that familiar gesture that made him look young and uncertain. "But fighting's different when both people agree to it, you know. When it's a test of skill and will, and both fighters are giving their all because they want to. What you're describing, the people you're killing didn't choose to fight you. They don't even know you exist. There's no challenge in that, no growth. It's just removing problems." Light felt a flash of irritation. Not everything is about personal growth and martial arts philosophy. Some situations require efficiency over honor. The criminals I eliminate aren't worthy opponents. They're parasites that need to be removed for the health of the larger organism. Treating them as legitimate challengers would be giving them far more respect than they deserve. "Maybe," Goku acknowledged, his tone still infuriatingly neutral. "But that's what makes me nervous about this whole thing. Because you're not just removing the problems yourself, you're making everyone else scared to become a problem too. And fear's a weird thing to build a world on. I've seen what happens when people act out of fear instead of choice. It makes them weaker, not stronger. Makes them look over their shoulders instead of looking forward." The insight was sharper than Light expected, cutting through his ideology to identify a potential flaw he'd always rationalized away. "Temporary fear," he countered. "A transitional phase necessary to break the old patterns. Once the new order is established, once people see the benefits of a crime-free society, the fear will transform into gratitude. They'll thank Kira for giving them the world they always deserved but were too weak to create for themselves." Goku didn't respond immediately. He picked up his teacup, which looked comically small in his calloused hand, and took a thoughtful sip. When he set it down, his expression was troubled in a way that made Light's stomach clench. "You really believe that?" Goku asked quietly. "That people will be grateful for being controlled? Because in my experience, people are strongest when they're free to choose, even if they sometimes choose wrong, taking that choice away. I don't know if that makes them better or just makes them obedient." Light wanted to snap that there was no difference, that obedience to righteous law was the foundation of civilization, but something stopped him. Perhaps it was the complete lack of hostility in Goku's demeanor, the way he was clearly trying to understand rather than condemn. Or perhaps it was the uncomfortable realization that Goku wasn't arguing from ignorance or naive morality. He was speaking from a lifetime of experience Light could never match, of battles fought and worlds saved through means that didn't require terrorizing entire populations into compliance. "I think we're just different," Light said finally, his voice carefully controlled. "You've spent your life fighting individuals who threaten the innocent. I'm addressing systemic rot that no amount of punching can fix. Our methods differ because our problems differ. That doesn't make either approach wrong, just appropriate to our respective circumstances." Goku considered this, then shrugged, a gesture so casual it seemed almost offensive given the weight of their discussion. "Maybe you're right," he said. "I'm not really smart enough to argue about systems and society and all that complicated stuff. I just know what feels right to me, and something about this feels off. But hey," he added with a sudden grin that transformed his entire face, "I'm not gonna fight you over it or anything. You haven't actually hurt anyone I care about, and you seem like you're really trying to do what you think is right. I can respect that, even if I'm not sure I agree with it." And that easy acceptance, that refusal to either endorse or oppose, made Light more nervous than any threat could have, because Light had prepared for enemies. He'd strategized for opposition, for moral crusaders who would try to stop him, for investigators who would hunt him relentlessly. But he had no strategy for someone like Goku, who listened without judging, understood without agreeing, and seemed perfectly content to let Light continue his work while reserving the right to feel uncertain about it. It was the uncertainty that bothered Light most, because if even someone as fundamentally good as Goku couldn't fully condemn Kira, what did that say about the righteousness of those who opposed him? And if Goku couldn't fully endorse Kira either, despite understanding the logic? What did that say about Light himself? The conversation at the cafe had ended cordially enough, with Goku thanking Light for explaining everything and wandering off in search of more food, leaving Light alone with his thoughts and the faint rustle of Ryuk's wings as the Shinigami materialized in the empty chair across from him. Light had smiled, had played the part of the patient-teacher content with his students' progress, but inside, something had cracked. Not broken, Light Yagami didn't break, but definitely cracked, like the first hairline fracture in what had been flawless ice. He stared at his reflection in the dark surface of his coffee, seeing his own eyes staring back, and felt something he hadn't experienced since acquiring the Death Note, genuine, gnawing uncertainty about his own invincibility. Goku's casual acceptance had been worse than opposition. Light had built his entire identity as Kira around the concept of absolute power, the power to judge, to execute, to reshape the world according to his vision. He was untouchable, invisible, a force of nature that couldn't be stopped or even properly perceived by ordinary humans. El had come close, had pushed him to the edge, but even El operated within the same fundamental reality as Light. They were both human, both bound by the same physical limitations, playing an intellectual game where the Death Note gave Light an insurmountable advantage. But Goku existed outside that framework entirely. He was a variable that didn't fit into any equation Light had constructed, a piece on the board that refused to follow the rules of chess. The walk back to his apartment had been mechanical, Light's mind churning through the implications with increasing agitation. He'd nodded absently at his mother's greeting, declined dinner with a polite excuse about studying, and locked himself in his room with an intensity that made even Ryuk raise an eyebrow. The Shinigami floated near the ceiling, munching on an apple and watching with undisguised interest as Light pulled out a notebook, not the Death Note, but an ordinary ledger where he kept his strategic planning, and began writing with sharp, angry strokes. "You're rattled," Ryuk observed, his rasping laugh filling the room. "That monkey boy really got under your skin, didn't he?" Light didn't respond immediately. He was listing everything he knew about Goku, creating a profile the way he had for El, for the FBI agents, for everyone who'd ever posed a threat to his ascension. Superhuman strength, instantaneous movement, energy projection, flight, alien biology. The list grew, each entry a reminder of how inadequate his usual methods would be. The Death Note required a name and face, both of which he had, but it also required that the target be human, and Goku, for all his appearance and mannerisms, was explicitly not human. He was Saiyan, whatever that meant, and Light had no way of knowing if the Death Note's power extended to alien species. "I'm thinking," Light said finally, his voice tight with controlled frustration. "Analyzing, planning." "Planning what?" Ryuk pressed, though his tone suggested he already knew. "How to kill him, because I gotta tell you, Light, that seems like a real long shot. I've seen a lot of humans die, but that guy, he's something else. Even I can feel it. He's got this energy, this presence that's not quite like anything I've encountered before. Makes me curious what would happen if he did die, though. Would he even have a lifespan I could see? Does my Shinigami vision work on aliens? The question sparked something in Light's mind, a possibility, a potential avenue of approach. Could you check? He asked, turning to face the Shinigami directly. Right now, from memory, could you see his lifespan when you looked at him? Ryuk tilted his head, his perpetual grin somehow conveying thoughtfulness. I don't think I looked. Wasn't really thinking about it at the time, was more interested in watching how you two would interact. But now that you mention it, he trailed off, clearly intrigued by the question himself. If we run into him again, I'll make sure to check. Though if I can't see one, that might mean the death note won't work on him at all. Shinigami vision and the note's power are connected, after all. Light's hand clenched around his pen hard enough to make it creak. The possibility that his ultimate weapon might be useless against Goku was intolerable, not because he actually needed to kill the Saiyan. Goku had shown no interest in stopping Kira, after all, but because the mere existence of someone beyond his reach undermined everything he'd built his identity upon. He was supposed to be God, the supreme arbiter of life and death, the force that could strike down anyone, anywhere, at any time. But what kind of God had limits? What kind of God encountered someone and thought, I might not be able to kill him? The thought festered as the evening wore on. Light went through the motions of his normal routine, reviewing case files to select tonight's criminals for judgment, checking news reports to monitor Kira's impact on global crime rates, maintaining the careful logs that kept his methodology organized and efficient. But underneath the familiar ritual, his mind kept circling back to Goku, to the way he'd moved, that impossible speed that made Light's carefully planned escapes and alibis seem pathetic by comparison. To the casual mention of destroying planets, said with the same tone someone might use to describe mowing a lawn, to the fundamental wrongness of someone so powerful being so utterly unconcerned with power itself. It wasn't just that Goku was strong. Light could have accepted that, could have worked around it, could have found ways to manipulate or control someone whose only advantage was physical might. But Goku's strength came packaged with something far more dangerous, complete self-assurance that didn't require validation or recognition. He didn't need to prove himself, didn't need to dominate, didn't need others to acknowledge his superiority. He simply existed at the peak of power and seemed perfectly content to use it only when necessary, for purposes he alone deemed worthy. It was the attitude of someone who genuinely didn't care about being God because he'd never doubted his own capabilities enough to need the title. And that, Light realized with a cold clarity that made his breath catch, was what truly disturbed him. Because when he looked at Goku, he saw everything he pretended to be but secretly wasn't. Goku's power was real and unquestionable, requiring no notebook or tricks or careful planning to maintain. Goku's morality was genuine and internally consistent, not a convenient narrative constructed to justify actions he'd already decided to take. Goku's confidence was earned through actual struggle and growth, not manufactured through the artificial advantage of a supernatural weapon. In every meaningful way, Goku was what Light claimed to be, a force of nature beyond ordinary human limitations, except Goku had achieved it through his own strength, while Light had simply found a magic notebook. The comparison was unbearable. Light stood abruptly, pacing his room with agitated energy while Ryuk watched with growing amusement. "You're spiraling," the Shinigami observed. "Getting all twisted up over a guy who barely even understands what you're doing, let alone opposes it, seems like a waste of energy to me." "He's a threat," Light insisted, though even as he said it, he knew it wasn't quite accurate. Goku hadn't threatened him, hadn't shown any intention of interfering with Kira's work, hadn't even expressed strong disapproval beyond vague discomfort. But the lack of active opposition didn't matter. Goku's mere existence was a threat to Light's self-conception, to the carefully constructed mental framework that allowed him to function as God of the new world. "A threat to what?" Ryuk pressed, his tone suggesting he knew exactly what but wanted to hear Light admit it. "Your plan, your safety, or just your ego?" Light spun to face him, eyes flashing with anger he usually kept buried beneath layers of calculated calm. "To the credibility of Kira," he snapped. "If word gets out that there's someone Kira can't touch, someone who could oppose him without fear of divine punishment, it undermines everything. People need to believe in Kira's absolute power, need to understand that there is no escape, no protection, no force in this world that can shield them from judgment if they choose evil." Goku's existence challenges that narrative. Even if he never acts against me, even if he spends the rest of his life eating and training and ignoring world affairs, the simple fact that he could challenge Kira if he wanted to that plants seeds of doubt. It was a rational argument, the kind of strategic thinking that had kept Light alive and undetected through years of playing cat and mouse with the world's greatest detectives. But Ryuk's knowing chuckle suggested he wasn't buying it, and if Light was honest with himself, which he rarely allowed himself to be, he wasn't entirely buying it either. The truth was simpler and more primal. Light needed Goku dead because Goku's existence made him feel small. Made him feel like a child playing dress-up in God's clothing, fooling the other children, but unable to deceive himself. Over the following days, what had started as vague discomfort calcified into obsession. Light found himself researching Saiyans with an intensity that eclipsed even his preparations against L, scouring the internet for any information about these alien warriors. He found surprisingly little, some conspiracy theory forums discussing strange lights in the sky and impossible battles that had somehow gone unnoticed by mainstream media, a few blurry photographs that might have shown something or might have been elaborate hoaxes, scattered references to a Z-Fighters group that supposedly defended Earth from threats the public never learned about. It was frustratingly sparse, like trying to research someone who existed in a parallel reality that only occasionally intersected with his own. But the lack of information didn't slow Light's fixation, it fed it. He began carrying the Death Note with him everywhere, its weight in his bag a constant reminder of both his power and its potential limitations. He mapped out Goku's habits with the same meticulous attention he'd once applied to tailing L, noting when and where the Saiyan appeared, what he ate, who he talked to. It was reconnaissance, Light told himself, strategic preparation, understanding the enemy. Except Goku wasn't an enemy, wasn't even acting like one, which somehow made Light's surveillance feel more desperate rather than less. Ryuk found the whole thing endlessly entertaining. You know what's funny? The Shinigami mused one afternoon as Light sat in yet another cafe, positioned to observe one of Goku's favorite restaurants across the street. You've killed thousands of people without a second thought. Criminals, sure, but also investigators, innocent bystanders who got too close, anyone who threatened your plan even slightly, wrote their names down like you were checking items off a grocery list. But this one guy, who hasn't actually done anything to you, he's the one who keeps you up at night. That's what we call ironic. It's not ironic, Light muttered, not taking his eyes off the restaurant where Goku had just entered, greeting the staff with his usual cheerful enthusiasm. It's strategic prioritization. The others were obstacles to be removed. Goku is different. Yeah, because he makes you feel like you're not really a god, Ryuk said bluntly. Just a smart human with a convenient weapon, and you can't stand that. Light wanted to deny it, to craft some eloquent argument about the philosophical necessity of maintaining divine authority, but the words stuck in his throat, because Ryuk was right, as he often was when it came to reading Light's deeper motivations. This wasn't about protecting Kira's mission or ensuring the New World's stability. This was about Light's desperate need to prove that he was special, chosen, fundamentally superior to ordinary humans. The Death Note had given him that validation, had transformed him from a brilliant but ultimately ordinary student into an unstoppable force that could reshape civilization. But Goku's presence stripped away that validation, revealed the note for what it really was, not proof of Light's worthiness to be God, but just a tool that anyone could use if they happened to find it. The realization should have been humbling, should have made Light question his entire ideology, his approach, his willingness to murder thousands. In pursuit of a vision that might be built on nothing more than wounded pride and delusions of grandeur. But Light Yagami didn't do humbling. Instead, the realization transformed into determination, cold and sharp and absolute. If Goku made him feel like less than a god, then Goku had to die. Not because it was necessary for the plan, not because Goku opposed him, but because Light needed to prove, to himself more than anyone, that there was no one beyond his reach, no power that could diminish him, no existence that could challenge his claim to divinity. It was madness, a descent into the kind of irrational obsession Light had always prided himself on avoiding. But he couldn't stop. Late at night, alone in his room with the Death Note open before him, he would stare at blank pages and imagine writing Goku's name there. Would picture the Saiyan clutching his chest, that perpetual smile fading into confusion and then nothing. Would envision the satisfaction of knowing that even someone who could destroy planets fell before Kira's judgment. The fantasy was intoxicating, more addictive than the actual act of killing had ever been, because it represented something beyond justice or world building or any of the noble narratives Light used to justify his actions. It represented proof that Light Yagami was special, that he was chosen, that he really was God, not just a teenager with good grades and a magic notebook. And if he could kill Goku, if he could bring down someone who existed so far beyond ordinary human limitations, then no one could ever again question his divinity. Not L's successors, not the investigators still hunting him, not the doubts that crept in during quiet moments when Light was alone with his thoughts and couldn't quite silence the voice asking whether he'd become exactly the kind of monster he claimed to be purging from the world. Ryuk watched this transformation with undisguised fascination, his earlier amusement giving way to something more complex. "You know," he said one evening, his tone unusually serious, "I've seen a lot of humans use the Death Note. Most of them go crazy pretty quick, the power's too much, burns through their sanity like fire through paper. You were different, stayed sharp, stayed focused, used it like a scalpel instead of a hammer. But this thing with the Saiyan, I don't know, Light. Feels like you're starting to slip, and once you start slipping, it's really hard to stop." Light looked up from the notebook, his eyes reflecting the desk lamp's cold light. "I'm not slipping," he said quietly. "I'm evolving, adapting to a new challenge. That's what separates the true God from pretenders, the ability to overcome any obstacle, no matter how unprecedented." "Sure," Ryuk agreed, though his tone suggested deep skepticism. "But here's the thing about obsession. Light, it makes you sloppy. Makes you take risks you normally wouldn't, ignore dangers you normally see coming. And in your line of work, sloppy gets you caught, or worse." But Light wasn't listening anymore. His mind had already moved past Ryuk's warnings, past rational consideration of risk and reward, past everything except the burning need to prove that he could kill Goku, that he would kill Goku, that nothing and no one existed beyond the reach of God, and that anyone who suggested otherwise, even through their mere existence, deserved death for the heresy of implying Light Yagami might be less than omnipotent. It was ego, pure and undistilled, the kind of pride that mythology taught preceded the fall. But Light had never believed in those stories, had always seen them as cautionary tales for lesser beings who lacked the intelligence and will to actually achieve divinity. He would prove them all wrong, would kill Goku, and in doing so would silence every doubt, answer every question, eliminate every uncertainty. And then, finally, he could return to his work of creating the perfect world, secure in the knowledge that he truly was the God that world needed. All he had to do was figure out how to kill someone who might be unkillable. How hard could it be? Light had spent 3 weeks preparing for a confrontation that would validate everything. He'd studied every scrap of information about Saiyan physiology he could find, cross-referenced reports of past battles with scientific analyses of energy signatures, even consulted obscure texts on mythology and alien life that most people would dismiss as fantasy. He'd crafted scenarios, planned contingencies, developed strategies for goading Goku into a situation where the Death Note might work despite the uncertainty of its effectiveness on non-humans. He'd imagined the confrontation 1,000 times, each version ending with Goku's defeat and Light's triumphant confirmation that nothing existed beyond Kira's dominion. So when he finally engineered a meeting in an abandoned warehouse district on the outskirts of the city, claiming he had important information about 3 ATs to Earth that Goku needed to hear, Light arrived with the focused intensity of a general entering his decisive battle. Goku showed up eating a meat bun, which somehow made Light's carefully constructed dramatic tension feel absurd. The Saiyan waved cheerfully as he approached, his orange gi slightly dusty from what had probably been a training session, his expression open and curious rather than wary. There was no sense that he perceived this as a confrontation at all, just another conversation with the interesting human he'd met a few weeks ago. Light stood in the center of the empty warehouse, the Death Note concealed in his jacket, every muscle coiled with anticipation. He'd rehearsed his opening statement, the words that would shift this from casual dialogue into something more significant, more final. "Thank you for coming," Light began, his voice carrying through the cavernous space with calculated authority. "I've been thinking a lot about our previous conversation, about what you said regarding choice and fear and the foundation of the world I'm building, and I've realized something important." He paused, letting the moment stretch, watching Goku's face for signs of tension or understanding. "You're the only real obstacle to Kira's vision. Not because you oppose me, you've made it clear you don't really care about human affairs enough to interfere, but because your existence itself contradicts the fundamental premise of my new world, that there is no power beyond Kira's judgment, no force that can escape divine punishment." Goku finished his meat bun, licking his fingers unself-consciously before responding. "Okay," he said slowly, his tone suggesting he was still trying to figure out where this was going. "So, what, you want to fight me to prove you're stronger?" There was no challenge in the question, no rising battle energy or aggressive posture. Just genuine curiosity, as if Light had suggested they play a board game rather than engage in mortal combat. "I want to demonstrate," Light corrected, his hand moving subtly toward the notebook, "that no one, not even you, exists beyond the reach of true justice. That Kira's power is absolute, universal, transcending any physical strength or alien biology. That God's judgment applies to all living beings, regardless of their origin or capabilities." He was building towards something, constructing an argument that would force Goku to engage, to fight back, to provide the violent resistance that would justify what Light needed to do. But Goku just scratched his head, that maddeningly casual gesture that seemed to be his default response to complexity. "I mean, I already know you can kill people with that notebook thing. You explained how it works. And yeah, maybe it would work on me. I'm not really sure about that, and honestly, I'm not that curious to find out." He smiled, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he understood more than his words indicated. "But why would you want to kill me?" "I haven't done anything to you, haven't hurt anyone you care about, mostly just been eating and training and trying to figure out this weird world where people have technology but not Kai control." The reasonableness of the response made Light's frustration spike. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Goku was supposed to recognize the challenge, to rise to it with that Saiyan pride he'd mentioned, to force a confrontation that would end with Light proving his superiority. Instead, the warrior who'd fought gods and destroyed planets was acting like Light had suggested something mildly inconvenient rather than a battle for ideological supremacy. "You don't understand," Light said, hearing the edge creeping into his voice and hating it. "This isn't personal, it's necessary. Your existence undermines everything Kira represents. As long as you're alive, there's doubt, questions, the possibility that God's power isn't truly absolute." Goku's expression shifted, becoming more serious but not angry. "So this is about proving something to yourself," he observed, and the insight cut deeper than any physical attack could have. "Not really about me at all. I'm just, what a test, a way to confirm you're really as powerful as you think you are." He took a step forward, and despite the complete lack of hostility, Light found himself tensing, hand gripping the notebook through his jacket. "Light, I've met a lot of people who needed to prove they were the strongest. Vegeta spent years obsessed with surpassing me. Frieza couldn't stand the idea that a monkey might be more powerful than him. Cell wanted to demonstrate he was the perfect being. And you know what? All that need to prove dominance. It didn't make them stronger, it made them weaker, made them make mistakes, take unnecessary risks, lose sight of what actually mattered." "I am not like them," Light hissed, pulling out the death note fully now, holding it where Goku could see. "I don't need to prove my strength. GTH through pointless combat. I don't need to train or struggle or gradually increase my power. I am God because I hold the power of absolute judgment, because I can end any life anywhere at any time. And if you won't fight me, if you won't give me the confrontation that demonstrates this truth, then I'll simply write your name and prove it that way." The threat hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Light thought he'd finally provoked the response he needed. Goku's expression grew darker, more focused, and Light could have sworn he felt something, a pressure in the air, a weight that made breathing slightly harder. But instead of attacking, instead of powering up or assuming a fighting stance, or doing any of the things Light had seen in the scattered video footage of past battles, Goku just sighed. It was a sound of disappointment more than anything else, and somehow that was more devastating than anger would have been. "You know what the difference is between you and the really strong people I've known?" Goku asked, his voice quiet but carrying effortlessly through the warehouse. "The really strong people, Master Roshi, Piccolo, even Vegeta eventually, they didn't need anyone else to validate their power. They knew what they were capable of because they'd tested themselves, pushed themselves, grown through actual struggle. They didn't need to kill someone to prove they were strong, they just were." He looked at Light with something that might have been pity, and that expression made Light want to scream. "But you've got this incredible weapon, this notebook that gives you power over life and death, and you still don't feel like a god. That's why you need to kill me. Not because I'm a threat, but because you think defeating me will finally make you feel as powerful as you pretend to be." The word struck home with devastating accuracy, cutting through all of Light's carefully constructed rationalizations to expose the desperate insecurity beneath. Light's hand trembled, with rage, with recognition, with the horrible understanding that Goku had seen through him more thoroughly than El ever had. because L had focused on proving Light was Kira, had cared about justice and catching a criminal. But Goku didn't care about any of that. He'd looked past the ideology, the grand vision of a new world, the philosophical justifications, and seen straight to the wounded ego at the center of everything. "You don't know anything about me," Light said, his voice low and dangerous. "You're a fighter, a simple warrior who understands nothing about the complexities of reshaping civilization. You reduce everything to questions of personal strength because that's all your limited perspective can comprehend. But I am beyond such petty concerns. I am." "Lonely," Goku interrupted, and the single word stopped Light's rant cold. "You're lonely and scared and convinced that if you're not the absolute strongest, the absolute smartest, the absolute most important person in existence, then you're nothing at all." He took another step forward, and Light found himself backing up despite having no rational reason to fear someone who'd shown no hostile intent. "I know what that feels like, kind of. When I was dead, when I was in otherworld training, there were times I wondered if I was really as strong as I needed to be, if I could really protect the people I cared about. But you know what I figured out? Needing to be the strongest, needing to be God, that's just another kind of weakness. Real strength is being okay with not being the best, not being perfect, and still trying your hardest anyway." Light wanted to dismiss the words as simplistic warrior philosophy, the kind of platitudes that sounded profound but meant nothing in the context of actual power dynamics and social engineering. But something in Goku's eyes, an ancient weariness that belied his youthful appearance, suggested these weren't empty words. This was someone speaking from genuine experience, from battles fought and losses endured, and hard-won wisdom that couldn't be gained through intellect alone. And that authenticity, that earned understanding, made Light feel more like a child playing pretend than any argument or evidence ever had. "I'm giving you a chance," Light said, his voice strained with the effort of maintaining control. "Fight me. Prove that physical strength matters. Show me that there's something beyond intellectual superiority and strategic manipulation. Because if you don't, if you just walk away from this, then I'll have no choice but to write your name and demonstrate that even gods bleed when true God wills it." Goku's response was to sit down, cross-legged on the dusty warehouse floor, looking up at Light with an expression of patient determination. "No," he said simply, "I'm not going to fight you, and I'm not going to let you manipulate me into it either. Because that's what you're doing, right? Trying to make me angry, trying to provoke me into attacking so you can feel justified in whatever you're planning." He patted the ground next to him in invitation. "Why don't you sit down and we can just talk, really talk, not this whole dramatic confrontation thing you've set up." The refusal was so absolute, so completely outside Light's prepared scenarios, that he felt his carefully constructed plan crumbling. This was supposed to be the moment of truth, the decisive encounter that would prove his divinity once and for all. But instead, he was standing in an empty warehouse, holding a death god's notebook, facing an opponent who transformed the confrontation into something more unsettling than any battle could have been, an invitation to genuine dialogue. "You don't understand what you're refusing," Light said, hearing the desperation creeping into his voice and hating it. "This isn't a request. I'm not asking for your cooperation. I'm telling you that one way or another, this ends today. Either you fight me and prove that strength matters, or I kill you and prove that it doesn't. Those are the only options." "There's always another option," Goku countered, his voice maddeningly calm. "You could choose to not kill me, could choose to accept that maybe, just maybe, you don't need to be the absolute strongest being in existence to accomplish good things, could choose to build your new world without needing to eliminate everyone who makes you feel inadequate." He tilted his head slightly, studying Light with an intensity that felt invasive. "What are you so afraid of, Light? What happens if I keep existing? Do you think people will suddenly stop fearing Kira, stop following the rules, or are you afraid that you'll keep feeling small, and that feeling will eventually make you question everything you've done?" The question hit like a physical blow because it was the thing Light had been avoiding thinking about, the doubt he'd been drowning in obsessive planning and strategic preparation. What was he afraid of? Not Goku interfering with his plans. The Saiyan had made it clear he had no interest in involving himself in human affairs unless directly threatened. Not Goku exposing him. The warrior barely understood the concept of secret identities and seemed to consider such deception unnecessarily complicated. No, what Light feared was exactly what Goku had identified, the constant, nagging awareness that someone existed who made his godhood feel like a costume rather than an identity. That as long as Goku lived, Light would never be able to fully believe in his own divinity. I don't need to justify myself to you, Light said, but the words sounded weak even to his own ears. I am Kira, I am God, and gods don't explain themselves to mortals, they simply act. His hand moved to open the death note, pen poised to write, but something stopped him. Perhaps it was the uncertainty about whether the note would even work on a Saiyan. Perhaps it was Ryuk's earlier warning about obsession making him sloppy. Or perhaps it was the simple fact that Goku, sitting peacefully on the ground with that patient expression, looked more secure in himself than Light had ever felt in his entire life. You know what I think, Goku said, his tone conversational rather than confrontational. I think you're a really smart guy who found something that gave you incredible power, and instead of using it to grow as a person, you let it become your whole identity. The notebook isn't just a tool to you, it's proof that you matter, that you're special, that you're better than everyone else. And now you've met someone the notebook might not work on, and that's terrifying. Because if the notebook isn't absolute, then maybe you aren't either. Light's hand clenched on the pen hard enough to make it creak. Every instinct screamed at him to write the name, to end this humiliating psychological dissection, to prove through action what words couldn't convey. But Goku's steady gaze held him frozen, trapped in a moment of awful clarity where he could see himself through the Saiyan's eyes. Not a god, not even a brilliant strategist, just a frightened young man clinging to power because he had nothing else to cling to. The vision was unbearable, completely contrary to the self-image Light had carefully cultivated, and yet undeniable in its accuracy. I could kill you right now, Light said, but it sounded like pleading rather than threatening. One name, 40 seconds, and you'd be gone, dead, no longer a problem, no longer a reminder of my limitations. Why shouldn't I? Give me one good reason why I should let you continue existing when your presence undermines everything I've worked to build. Goku stood up slowly, dusting off his gi, and walked closer until he was standing directly in front of Light, close enough that Light could see the faint scars on his face, the calluses on his hands, the evidence of countless battles survived. Because killing me won't fix what's broken in you, Goku said quietly. It'll just prove that you're so scared of your own weakness that you'll murder anyone who reminds you it exists. And once you cross that line, killing not for justice or your new world, but just because someone makes you feel bad about yourself, there's no going back. You'll know what you really are, and no amount of pretending to be God will change it. The words hung in the dusty air of the warehouse, and Light realized with a cold shock that Goku was right. If he wrote the name now, in this moment, for these reasons, he would be proving everything the Saiyan had said about him, would be admitting that his godhood was fragile enough to shatter from one person's mere existence, would be revealing that all his talk of justice and new worlds and divine judgment was just elaborate justification for ego and insecurity. The death note felt heavy in his hands, no longer a symbol of absolute power, but a crutch he'd been using to avoid ever testing whether he was actually special without it. Light stood there, frozen in indecision, while Goku waited patiently for him to make a choice that would define not just this moment, but everything Light would become afterward. And for the first time since acquiring the Death Note, Light Yagami genuinely didn't know what to do. The silence stretched between them like a living thing, heavy with the weight of Light's indecision and the patient inevitability of Goku's waiting. Light's hand still gripped the pen. The Death Note opened to a blank page that should have been filled by now, should have contained the name that would resolve this impossible situation and restore his sense of divine authority. But the name remained unwritten, and in that absence, something shifted in the atmosphere of the warehouse. Goku's expression softened further, moving past patience into something that looked almost like compassion, and he took a small step back, giving Light space that somehow felt more confining than proximity had been. You know, Goku said, his tone shifting into something more contemplative, I've died a few times. He said it casually, the way someone might mention having visited a particular restaurant before, and the statement was so unexpected, so completely outside the framework of their confrontation, that Light's concentration broke entirely. His hand lowered slightly, pen still poised but forgotten, as his mind tried to process what he'd just heard. Died a few times. Past tense, yet here Goku stood, very much alive, very much solid and real and impossible. That's not possible, Light said automatically, his intellect rejecting the claim before his reason could catch up. Death is final. It's the ultimate sanction, the absolute end. That's what gives it power, what makes it the perfect tool for justice. You can't just die and come back. That violates everything we understand about mortality, about the fundamental nature of existence. Goku shrugged, a gesture so unconcerned with Light's ontological crisis that it felt almost offensive. Well, I did. First time was against my brother Raditz. Had to sacrifice myself to hold him in place so Piccolo could kill us both with his special beam cannon. That one really hurt, he added, as if the pain of death was worth noting but not particularly remarkable. Then I died fighting Cell. He was about to blow up the entire Earth, so I used instant transmission to teleport him to King Kai's planet instead. Saved Earth, but King Kai wasn't too happy about it. He laughed at the memory, a sound completely devoid of trauma or existential dread. Light felt his carefully constructed worldview beginning to crack, fault lines spreading through foundations he'd thought were unshakable. The Death Note's power came from its finality, from the absolute certainty that once a name was written, that person ceased to exist in any meaningful way. Ryuk had explained the Shinigami realm, had mentioned that humans went to neither heaven nor hell after death, just to nothingness. It was that nothingness that gave Kira's judgment its weight, its terrible righteousness. But Goku was describing death as something temporary, an inconvenience rather than an ending. "You're lying," Light said, but his voice lacked conviction, or delusional. "Death doesn't work that way. It can't work that way." "Why not?" Goku asked, and the simplicity of the question cut through Light's defensive rationalization. "I mean, your world has those Dragon Balls, right? They can bring people back from the dead. I asked around, and apparently Earth's version can do that. My world had them too, though Bulma destroyed them after. Well, that's a long story. But the point is, death isn't always permanent. In other world, that's where you go when you die. There's this whole system. King Yema judges your soul, decides if you go to heaven or hell, and if you're strong enough or special enough, sometimes you get to keep your body and train with the Kais." His eyes lit up at the memory. "That's actually where I learned Super Saiyan 3, and Fusion, and met some really amazing fighters." Light's mind was racing, trying to integrate this information with everything he knew, everything he'd built his identity around. If death wasn't absolute, if people could come back, if there was an entire bureaucracy managing the afterlife with its own rules and hierarchies, then what did that mean for Kira's judgment? For the new world he was building on the foundation of permanent, irreversible consequences. "Even if what you're saying is true," Light said slowly, "it doesn't apply to normal humans. You're special, alien, powerful, whatever. The people I judge don't have access to Dragon Balls or Kais or any of this supernatural resurrection system you're describing. For them, death is still final." Goku tilted his head, considering this. "Maybe, but that's kind of the point, isn't it? You're making this huge assumption that death is the worst thing that can happen to someone, that it's the ultimate punishment. But what if it's not? What if it's just the next thing, a transition instead of an ending?" He sat back down, apparently deciding this conversation required more comfort than standing aloud. "When I was dead the first time, I spent a year inning with King Kai. It was actually pretty great, peaceful, focused, no distractions. I got way stronger, learned techniques I'd never have discovered on Earth. Sure, I missed Gohan and Kai and everyone, but it wasn't torture. It wasn't punishment, it was just different." The philosophical implications of this were staggering, and Light felt them undermining his entire moral framework like water eroding stone. If death wasn't suffering, wasn't annihilation, wasn't the terrible price that made people fear Kira's judgment, then what was he actually accomplishing? Was he just relocating criminals to a different plane of existence where they might continue being themselves without consequence? The thought was intolerable, completely contrary to everything the Death Note represented. "Ryuk," Light said sharply, turning to where the Shinigami floated, visible only to him. "Tell him, explain what really happens when someone dies, the nothingness, the void." Ryuk scratched his head, looking uncharacteristically uncomfortable. "Well, that's what happens to humans in our system," he said slowly. "When someone from the human world dies, they don't go to heaven or hell, just to nothingness like you said." But he glanced at Goku with something that might have been curiosity or might have been concern. "This guy's not from our system, is he? He's talking about a whole different afterlife setup, different rules, different management." "I've been around a long time, seen a lot of weird stuff, but I've never encountered whatever bureaucracy he's describing. Doesn't mean it's not real, just means it's outside what I know." Light felt the ground shifting beneath him, not literally but epistemologically. One of the fundamental assumptions undergirding his entire philosophy, that death was absolute, final, the ultimate consequence that gave his judgment meaning, might be wrong, or at least might be more complicated than he'd understood. And if that assumption was wrong, how many others might be? How much of his carefully constructed ideology rested on incomplete information and human-centric thinking that didn't account for the broader, stranger reality that Goku's existence implied? "So when you kill someone with that notebook," Goku continued, apparently not noticing Light's existential crisis. You think you're erasing them from existence, punishing them forever, making them stop being. But what if you're not? What if they just go somewhere else, face different judgment, maybe even get another chance eventually? Would that change how you feel about using it? Of course it would, Light snapped, the admission escaping before he could stop it. The entire point is permanent removal, absolute consequence, creating a world where people understand that evil actions lead to irrevocable, terrible outcomes. If criminals just go to some afterlife where they might be fine, might even thrive, then what deterrent is there? What justice is served? His voice was rising, frustration and fear bleeding through his usually controlled demeanor. Goku's expression grew more serious, but that's kind of messed up when you think about it. You're not actually concerned with justice. You're concerned with making sure people suffer enough to scare everyone else into behaving. That's not justice. That's just cruelty with a fancy justification. He leaned forward, his eyes intense in a way Light had never seen before. Real justice isn't about making people afraid to do wrong. It's about helping them understand why wrong is wrong, giving them chances to be better, sometimes protecting others from those who can't or won't change. But it's not about permanent destruction. That's just revenge dressed up in God language. The accusation stung precisely because Light couldn't immediately refute it. He wanted to argue that deterrence was a legitimate form of justice, that the fear of consequences was what separated civilization from chaos, that his methods were harsh but necessary for the greater good. But Goku's words had exposed something Light had always known but never acknowledged. His use of the Death Note was less about justice and more about control, about proving his power, about creating a world that validated his belief in his own superiority. The criminals were almost incidental. What mattered was that Light got to decide who lived and died, got to play God in the most literal sense possible. You died fighting to save others, Light said, changing tactics. Sacrificed yourself for the greater good. How is that different from what I'm doing? I'm sacrificing my peace, my normal life, my very humanity in service of creating a better world. We're both willing to make the hard choices that others won't. Goku shook his head slowly. The difference is choice. When I died fighting Cell, it was my choice to make that sacrifice. I wasn't forcing it on anyone else. And the people I fought, even the really bad ones like Frieza, I gave them chances. Tried to help them see they could choose differently. I only killed when there was absolutely no other option left, when they made it clear they'd keep hurting people no matter what. He paused, his expression pained. And even then, it hurt. Taking a life, even a life that's doing terrible things, it's not something to be casual about. It's not something to do thousands of times without it changing you, hardening you, making you into something cold. Light felt something twist in his chest. Not guilt, he refused to call it that, but something uncomfortable and acidic. You don't understand the scope of the problem I'm solving, he insisted. Individual confrontations, one-on-one battles where you can try to redeem your opponent, that's a luxury I don't have. I'm dealing with systemic evil, with millions of criminals who will never change, who will continue victimizing others unless someone stops them permanently. Your methods don't scale. Maybe they're not supposed to, Goku replied softly. Maybe trying to fix everything, control everything, judge everything, maybe that's the problem, not the solution. You've set yourself up as the only person who can save the world, and that's made you think you have to kill anyone who threatens that narrative. But Light, the world doesn't need a god who kills people. It needs people who care about each other, who help each other grow, who create systems that work without requiring one person to hold all the power. The suggestion that Light was unnecessary, that his grand vision was not just flawed but fundamentally misguided, should have made him angry, should have provoked the righteous fury of God confronting a heretic. But instead, Light felt tired. Not physically, he was too young, too healthy for that kind of exhaustion, but mentally, spiritually, tired in a way he'd never allowed himself to acknowledge. Tired of the constant vigilance, the endless judgment, the isolation that came from setting himself above and apart from all of humanity. Tired of never being able to admit doubt, never being able to question whether the path he'd chosen was right or simply the only way he could conceive of being special. I've died and come back, Goku said again, bringing the conversation full circle. And each time it taught me something, that life is precious but not fragile, that endings aren't always permanent, that the universe is way bigger and stranger than we think, with rules we don't fully understand. He looked at Light with an expression of such genuine concern that it was almost painful to witness. But the most important thing I learned. Death isn't something to control or weaponize or use to make yourself feel powerful. It's just part of the journey. And when you try to take control of it, try to play God with other people's journeys, you're not creating justice, you're just stopping their stories before they're finished. Some of those stories might have had redemption in them, growth, change, but you'll never know because you decided you knew enough to end them. Light wanted to argue, to construct a logical defense of his actions, to explain why his judgment was necessary and right and the only solution to humanity's fundamental problems. But the words wouldn't come. Because Goku wasn't attacking his logic, he was attacking his premise. The assumption that Light had the right to judge, to control, to determine the worth of other people's existences. And that assumption, Light realized with dawning horror, had never been examined. He'd accepted it as self-evident the moment he picked up the Death Note, had built everything else on that unquestioned foundation. But what if the foundation was wrong? What if his entire magnificent structure of justice and divine authority was built on sand? "You're afraid," Goku observed, his tone gentle rather than accusatory. "Not of me, of what I represent. Because if death isn't absolute, if it's not the ultimate control you thought it was, then the Death Note isn't the infinite power you believed in. And if the Death Note isn't infinite power, then maybe you're not God after all. Just a person with a tool trying to solve problems in the only way you could imagine. That's scary, I get it. But Light, it's also okay. You don't have to be God. You just have to be human and try your best. That's enough." But it wasn't enough. It had never been enough. Light Yagami, ordinary human, was mediocre, forgettable. Just another smart student in a world full of smart people, distinguished only by his good looks and his ability to test well. The Death Note had transformed him into something more, had given him purpose and power and a reason to believe his existence mattered. Without it, or rather, without the absolute authority it represented, he was nothing again, just a murderer. Just a deluded teenager who'd convinced himself that killing thousands of people was heroic rather than monstrous. The realization should have broken him, should have sent him to his knees, weeping for forgiveness, acknowledging the magnitude of his crimes. But Light Yagami didn't break, he crystallized. The fear and doubt hardened into something cold and sharp and absolutely committed. Because if accepting his humanity meant accepting that everything he'd done was wrong, that all those deaths were meaningless, that his grand vision was delusion, then he would reject humanity entirely. Would choose to be the monster, the god, the destroyer rather than face the alternative. "Thank you," Light said quietly and meant it. "You've clarified something for me, helped me understand what I really am, what I've chosen to become." He looked at Goku with eyes that reflected no light, that had gone flat and dead in a way that made even the Saiyan warrior tense slightly. "I am Kira. Not because the Death Note made me God, but because I chose to become Judgment incarnate. And whether death is absolute or just transition, whether there's an afterlife or nothingness, doesn't matter. What matters is that I have the will to use this power, and you don't have the will to stop me. That makes me God in the only way that counts." Goku stood slowly, his expression sad in a way that cut deeper than anger could have. "That's not what I was trying to." "I know what you were trying to do," Light interrupted. "Save me, redeem me, show me there's another path, but you were wrong about one thing. I'm not afraid of what you represent. I'm grateful for it, because you've shown me that conviction matters more than absolute power. That choosing to be God is what makes someone God, regardless of the actual scope of their authority." He closed the Death Note, slipping it back into his jacket. "I won't write your name today. Not because I can't, not because you've convinced me killing is wrong, but because you're more useful to me alive. A reminder that I chose this path knowing its limitations, that I committed to divinity fully aware it might be delusion. That makes the commitment more meaningful, not less." And as Goku watched him walk away, Light felt something settle in his chest, not peace but terrible certainty. He had looked into the abyss of his own insignificance and chosen to become the abyss rather than be consumed by it. Whatever that made him, it wasn't human anymore. And that was exactly what he'd wanted all along. Ryuk had been unusually quiet since the warehouse confrontation, floating behind Light with none of his usual commentary or sardonic observations. At first, Light attributed this to the Shinigami's typical capriciousness. Ryuk had never been predictable in his engagement, sometimes chattering endlessly about apples and boredom, other times going silent for hours as he observed the human world with inscrutable interest. But as days passed and the silence persisted, Light began to notice other details that troubled him. Ryuk's movements had become more erratic, less fluid. He would occasionally glance over his shoulder at nothing, or tilt his head as if listening to sounds Light couldn't hear. Most unsettling of all, he'd stopped eating apples with his usual enthusiasm, letting them sit half-finished while he stared into middle distance with an expression that might have been concern. It was nearly a week after the confrontation when Ryuk finally broke his silence, materializing in Light's bedroom with enough force that the sudden displacement of air rustled papers on the desk. "We need to talk," the Shinigami said, his voice lacking its usual playful rasp. "Something's wrong in the Shinigami realm, and it's got everything to do with your Saiyan friend." Light looked up from his homework. Maintaining his academic performance was still necessary for the careful facade of normalcy, and felt a spike of interest cut through his recent philosophical malaise. "What do you mean, something's wrong? The Shinigami realm is supposed to be eternal, unchanging. What could possibly affect it?" Ryuk settled onto the bed, his skeletal frame somehow conveying tension despite its inhuman geometry. "That's what we thought too. The realm exists outside normal time and space. It's where Shinigami go between hunts in the human world, where we write names and extend our lifespans and generally just exist in the endless tedium of immortality. It's been the same for as long as any of us can remember, which is a really long time. Thousands of years, maybe longer. We don't really keep track." He paused, his massive eyes fixed on Light with unusual intensity. "But 3 days ago, something changed. The realm shuddered. That's the only way I can describe it, like reality itself flinched." Light set down his pen, giving Ryuk his full attention. This was new information, something that might be useful, might provide insight into the broader metaphysics governing the Death Note's power. A shudder, be more specific. What did it feel like? What were the effects? "It felt like when you're standing on solid ground, and suddenly realized the ground isn't as solid as you thought," Ryuk said, his voice dropping to something almost reverent. "Like the fundamental rules changed for a second, and the effects. Light, you've never seen Shinigami scared before. We don't really do scared, we're death gods, we exist beyond mortal concerns like fear or hope or any of that stuff. But after the shudder, I saw Shinigami that have been around for millennia looking over their shoulders, clustering together, whispering, 'That's not normal. That's never happened in all my time there.'" Light's mind was already racing through possibilities, constructing theories about what could affect beings that existed outside conventional reality. Did it coincide with anything specific? Any particular death? Any unusual use of a death note? Ryuk's laugh was bitter and humorless. "That's the thing we checked. Every Shinigami with a notebook in the human world reported normal activity. No unusual deaths, no weird complications, nothing that should have caused any kind of disturbance. But then one of the older ones, Harmonia Justin, he's been around forever. He said something that made everyone go quiet. He said, 'I felt this once before, eons ago, when the realm of the Kais touched our domain. When beings that exist outside death's jurisdiction came too close to our sphere of influence.'" The implication clicked into place with the force of revelation. Goku, light-breathed. His presence in this world, his interaction with the Death Note, or rather, the potential for interaction, it's creating some kind of metaphysical disturbance. "That's what I've been thinking," Ryuk confirmed. "And it gets weirder. I tried to look at his lifespan again, really focused this time, used the Shinigami eyes properly. You know what I saw?" He leaned forward and there was something like fear in his expression. "Nothing, not like he has no lifespan, like the concept of lifespan doesn't apply to him. It's like trying to see the color of silence or count the weight of a shadow. The numbers that should be there, that are there for every human, every living thing we've ever encountered, they just don't exist for him. He's a blank space in the system." Light felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. If Goku existed outside the framework that gave Death Notes their power, if he was genuinely beyond the reach of Shinigami jurisdiction, then that meant the confrontation in the warehouse had been even more futile than Light had realized. He couldn't have killed Goku even if he'd written the name. The Death Note simply didn't apply. Have the other Shinigami noticed? Do they know there's something in this world that their power can't touch? "They know something's here," Ryuk said. "They can feel it the way you might feel someone watching you in a dark room. Can't see them, can't prove they're there, but you know. Some of the younger ones want to investigate, find out what's causing the disturbance. But the older ones, the ones who have been around long enough to have real wisdom instead of just accumulated boredom, they're scared Light. They're saying we should pull back, that maybe dropping Death Notes in the human world isn't worth the risk if there are beings there that can destabilize our entire realm." This was significant, potentially catastrophic if Light thought through all the implications. The Death Note's power derived from the Shinigami realm, from the fundamental laws that governed death gods and their ability to manipulate human lifespans. But if those laws were being challenged, if the realm itself was becoming unstable, what did that mean for the notes already in circulation? For Kira's ability to continue his work? Is there a risk the note will stop working? Light asked, trying to keep the urgency out of his voice. Ryuk shrugged, but the gesture lacked his usual nonchalance. Honestly, I don't know, nothing like this has happened before, so there's no precedent. The connection between the note and the realm is stable for now. I can feel it, like a thread that's still intact. But that shudder, it was like something tugged on the thread, hard, and if it gets tugged too many times or too hard. He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Light stood and began pacing, a habit he'd developed when processing complex information. This changed everything, added a variable he'd never anticipated having to account for. The Death Note was supposed to be absolute, its power derived from forces beyond human comprehension, but nonetheless reliable, predictable. But Goku's mere presence was undermining that reliability, introducing chaos into a system that demanded order. What happens if the thread breaks? If the connection between this world and the Shinigami realm is severed? Best case scenario, the Death Notes become ordinary notebooks, just paper and binding, no power at all. You'd be holding evidence of thousands of murders with no way to Kanti. New Kira's work, Ryuk's expression grew darker. Worst case, the severance happens while someone's in the middle of using the note. The lifespan transfer gets interrupted, maybe reverses. The Shinigami attached to that note might get pulled back violently, or might get stranded in the human world without connection to the realm that sustains us. And the human using it, he paused significantly. Well, let's just say death by Death Note would look pleasant compared to what happens when you're caught in the middle of a severed connection between realms. Light felt his carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. He'd built everything on the assumption that the Death Note was reliable, that its power was consistent and predictable. But now he was learning that power had vulnerabilities he'd never considered, that it existed within a larger metaphysical framework that could be disrupted by forces he didn't understand and couldn't control. How do we stabilize it? There must be something we can do to reinforce the connection, prevent future disturbances. Ryuk's laugh was harsh and mocking. Light, you're a human, a really smart human with delusions of godhood, but still just human. You exist entirely in this world, have no connection to the realm beyond what the note provides. There's nothing you can do about metaphysical stability. That's way above your pay grade. He floated closer, his face inches from Light's. But here's the thing, there might be something I can do. Or rather, something all the Shinigami collectively could do. If we pulled back, stopped dropping notes in the human world, let the connections fade naturally, the disturbance might settle, the realm might stabilize. We'd be giving up our entertainment, our way of staving off the boredom, but we'd be protecting our own existence. The implication was clear, and it made Light's blood run cold. You're talking about taking the Death Note back, ending Kira's mission before it's complete. I'm talking about survival, Ryuk corrected. Shinigami aren't used to feeling vulnerable. We're supposed to be the ultimate predators, the inevitable end that comes for all living things. But your Saiyan friend, just by existing, has reminded us that we're not as invincible as we thought, that there are things in this universe that exist outside our jurisdiction, beyond our power, and that's terrifying to beings who have never had to be afraid before. Light's mind raced through scenarios, calculating probabilities and outcomes with the desperate speed of someone watching their entire world crumble. If the Shinigami recalled the Death Notes, Kira would end. All the work he'd done, all the criminals he'd judged, all the progress toward the new world, it would stop, freeze in an incomplete state. The crime rates would rise again as people realized Kira was gone. The investigators hunting him would intensify their efforts, knowing that without the note's power, he was just a mass murderer who could finally be caught and punished. Everything he'd sacrificed, every piece of his humanity he'd discarded in service of his vision, would be for nothing. You can't, Light said, and heard the plea in his own voice, the desperation he usually kept buried beneath layers of calculated control. The world needs Kira, needs the order I'm creating. If you take the note back now, all those deaths become meaningless. All that progress gets erased. You can't just... I can, Ryuk interrupted, his voice flat and final. I'm a Shinigami, Light. My first loyalty is to my own realm, my own kind. If continuing this game with you puts us at risk, then the game ends. That was always the deal. I gave you the note for my entertainment, but I never promised to let you keep it forever, especially not if keeping it might destroy everything I am. The casual dismissal of everything Light had built was almost physically painful. He'd thought of Ryuk as an ally, or at least a consistent presence, someone who would remain by his side throughout the creation of the new world. But the Shinigami's words made it clear that Light had been deluding himself. Ryuk didn't care about Kira's mission, about justice or the new world or any of the grand philosophical justifications Light used to rationalize his actions. Ryuk cared about entertainment and self-preservation, in that order, and when those two priorities came into conflict, entertainment would lose every time. What if I could fix it? Light asked, grasping at possibilities. What if I found a way to eliminate the source of the disturbance, remove the variable that's destabilizing your realm? Would that be enough to let me keep the note? Ryuk's eyes narrowed and Light could see the Shinigami calculating, considering. You're talking about killing Goku, but we already established the death note probably won't work on him. His lifespan doesn't register, which means the note can't claim it. So how exactly would you eliminate him? Light's smile was cold and sharp, the expression of someone who just found a solution to an impossible problem. The death note isn't the only way to kill someone, it's just the most efficient. But if efficiency isn't an option, I'll find another method. Poison, accident, manipulation. There are conventional means of murder that humans have been using for millennia. They're messier, riskier, require more direct involvement. But if Goku's existence threatens the foundation of everything I've built, then he needs to die, regardless of the method required. That's a dangerous game, Ryuk warned, though there was a hint of his old amusement creeping back into his tone. The Saiyan's not just strong, he's aware now. Knows your Kira, knows you see him as a threat. He'll be watching for moves against him, even if he's not naturally suspicious. And if you fail, if he realizes you're actively trying to kill him through mundane means, that might be enough to push him from neutral to opposed. Then you'd have a real problem. I know, Light acknowledged, but what choice do I have? If doing nothing means losing the death note, then I have to act, have to remove the source of instability before the Shinigami decide the risk isn't worth it. He looked at Ryuk directly, his expression intense. How much time do I have before your realm makes a decision about recalling the notes? Ryuk considered the question, his skeletal features difficult to read. Hard to say. Shinigami don't exactly operate on human timescales. We could debate this for what seems like a day and discover years have passed in your world, or we could reach a decision in what feels like years and find only minutes passed here. But if I had to guess, he paused, measuring his words carefully. I'd say you have weeks, maybe a month or two, before the conservative faction convinces everyone that the risk isn't worth the entertainment. They're still arguing about it, still trying to understand what's happening. But fear is a powerful motivator, even for death gods. Eventually, fear will win. Weeks or months, it wasn't much time, but it might be enough. Light's mind was already shifting into planning mode, considering approaches, identifying weaknesses, constructing scenarios that could result in Goku's death without directly implicating Kira. It would be the most dangerous thing he'd ever attempted, far riskier than manipulating FBI agents or outsmarting L, because this time, his target was someone who could survive being shot, who could move faster than Light could perceive, who had powers and abilities that made conventional assassination nearly impossible. But nearly impossible wasn't the same as impossible, and Light Yagami had built an entire new world on the foundation of accomplishing what others deemed impossible. This would just be one more achievement, one more demonstration of his superiority to ordinary humans who accepted limitations as absolute. He would find a way. He always found a way. There's something else you should know, Ryuk said, his tone growing more serious. The disturbance isn't one-directional. If your Saiyan's presence is affecting the Shinigami realm, there's a decent chance the Shinigami realm is affecting him too. We exist in a kind of balance, death gods and living beings, each defining the other through opposition. When that balance gets disrupted, strange things can happen. He might start feeling watched, might sense something wrong even if he can't identify what. Might even begin to perceive things he shouldn't be able to perceive. Like seeing Shinigami, Light asked sharply. Maybe, or maybe just feeling our presence, sensing the weight of death following you around. Point is, the more time you spend near him while carrying the note, the more likely he is to realize something's off about you specifically. The disturbance is centered on him, but you're the anchor point, the human with the note who's interacted with him directly. That creates a connection, a resonance that both realms can feel. Light absorbed this information, adding it to his growing list of complications. He couldn't avoid Goku entirely without arousing suspicion, but every interaction increased the risk that the Saiyan would perceive the supernatural forces surrounding Light. It was a delicate balance, requiring precise calibration of proximity and distance. Too close, and Goku might sense the Shinigami presence. Too distant, and Light wouldn't be able to identify opportunities for elimination. "I need detailed information," Light said, his voice dropping into the cold, analytical tone he used when planning complex operations. "Everything you can learn about how the Shinigami realm interfaces with this world, what the limits of your power are, what conditions might allow Goku to perceive you, what happens if the balance gets disrupted further. I can't plan effectively without understanding the full scope of the metaphysical situation." Ryuk's grin widened. "Ed showing too many teeth. Now that's the Light I know. Not the philosophical one having existential crises about mortality and meaning, but the calculating one who treats every problem like a puzzle to be solved through superior intellect." He stood, stretching his wings in a gesture that suggested preparation for travel. "I'll go back to the realm, ask some questions, see what the older Shinigami know about past disturbances and how they were resolved. But Light, be careful. You're playing with forces you don't fully understand, trying to kill something that might be unkillable, all while the ground beneath your feet is becoming less stable. This isn't like your previous challenges. This is existential." "Everything I do is existential," Light replied. "That's what it means to be God. Every choice, every action determines the future of the entire world. I've been operating at that level since the day I picked up the Death Note. This is just a more literal version of the same challenge." Ryuk laughed as he faded from visibility, preparing to return to his realm. "Keep telling yourself that," his voice echoed as he disappeared. "But gods don't usually worry about their tools breaking. Might want to think about what that says about your divinity." And then Light was alone in his room, surrounded by the mundane evidence of his double life, textbooks and case files, the Death Note hidden in his desk drawer, the carefully maintained facade of normalcy that concealed the mind of history's greatest mass murderer. But for the first time since acquiring the note, Light felt the precariousness of his position. Felt the way his power rested on foundations he didn't control, couldn't fully understand, and couldn't protect from forces that existed beyond his reach. But feeling precarious and accepting defeat were entirely different things. Light Yagami would find a way to kill Goku, stabilize the Shinigami realm, and preserve the Death Note's power. Because the alternative, returning to being ordinary, being powerless, being meaningless, was simply unthinkable. He would rather die as God than live as human. And if the gods of death themselves felt vulnerable, well, that just proved that even divinity had limits. The difference was that Light refused to accept his. Light had spent 2 weeks meticulously engineering another encounter, manipulating circumstances with the precision of a master puppeteer, until Goku would have no choice but to meet him at the location Light designated. He'd used anonymous tips about unusual energy signatures that might indicate threats to Earth, leveraged connections through carefully obscured channels, even planted false information suggesting someone was planning to use the Dragon Balls for nefarious purposes. All roads led to a specific time and place, midnight at an abandoned observatory on the outskirts of the city, where Light would be waiting with arguments prepared, philosophical weapons sharpened, ready to force Goku into acknowledging what Light had become. Except Goku arrived eating a sandwich, looking mildly confused about why someone had sent him 17 different messages through various intermediaries all pointing to this location, and his first words completely shattered Light's carefully prepared opening statement. "Oh, hey Light, I was wondering if this was you. Nobody else would go through this much trouble just to have a conversation. You could have just asked, you know, I'm not that hard to find." The casual dismissal of Light's elaborate manipulation, the reduction of complex psychological warfare to going through trouble, made something hot and furious ignite in Light's chest. He'd spent 14 days planning this encounter, calculating optimal phrasing, considering every possible response Goku might have and preparing counters for each. He'd barely slept, had let his grades slip slightly for the first time ever, had snapped at his family with uncharacteristic irritation. All in service of creating the perfect conditions for this conversation, and Goku thought he could have just asked. "This isn't a casual conversation," Light said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "This is a confrontation, a reckoning. You've been wandering through this world completely oblivious to the significance of what's happening, treating the complete restructuring of human civilization like it's some minor curiosity barely worth your attention, and I'm done pretending that's acceptable." Goku finished his sandwich, crumpled the wrapper, and looked around for somewhere to throw it before apparently deciding his pocket was good enough. "Okay," he said agreeably. "So what do you want to confront me about? I thought we already talked through most of this stuff." You're Kira, you're trying to make the world better through fear and killing. I think that's probably not the best approach, but I'm not gonna stop you. Did something change?" The sheer reasonableness of Goku's tone made Light want to SCR. This was supposed to be dramatic, weighted with the gravity of ideological conflict, but Goku was treating it like a follow-up meeting to discuss a minor disagreement about restaurant choices. "What changed," Light said, biting off each word with precision, "is that I've realized something fundamental. Your existence, your refusal to take any of this seriously, to acknowledge the magnitude of what I'm accomplishing, it's not neutrality, it's a statement. You're saying that nothing I do matters enough to warrant your genuine attention or concern. That Kira, the reshaping of global civilization, the creation of a new world order, it's all beneath your notice. And I need to know, is that true? Do you genuinely see me as so insignificant that my work doesn't even register as worth opposing?" Goku's expression shifted, becoming more thoughtful, and Light felt a surge of satisfaction that he'd finally pierced through the Saiyan's casual exterior. But then Goku said something that drove a spike of ice through Light's chest. "I mean, I don't think you're insignificant as a person. You're obviously really smart and you care a lot about making things better. But your work, the Kira stuff," he shrugged, and the gesture contained more devastating dismissal than any argument could have. "It's human stuff. Political stuff, not really my area. I fight monsters and aliens who want to destroy planets. A guy killing criminals with a magic notebook. It's just not the same scale of threat, you know." Not the same scale. Light felt something crack inside him, a fissure opening in the foundation of his carefully constructed identity. He'd killed thousands of people, had brought crime rates down globally by double-digit percentages, had transformed himself into a figure that governments feared and populations worshipped. He'd become God, or as close to God as any human had ever achieved. And Goku, who Light had built up in his mind as the ultimate validation, the final proof of his divinity if he could somehow overcome this obstacle, saw him as just a guy with a magic notebook. Small, human, insignificant. "Not the same scale," Light repeated, and heard his voice shaking despite his best efforts at control. "I've reshaped human civilization, changed the fundamental equations governing crime and punishment across the entire planet, created a system of justice that's more effective than anything in history. And you're saying that's, what, not impressive, not worth your attention, just human stuff, that's beneath the notice of someone who fights aliens." Goku's expression grew more concerned, and somehow that was worse than if he'd been dismissive. "I think you're misunderstanding. It's not that what you're doing isn't impressive. It obviously took a lot of planning and intelligence. And it's not that I don't care about human stuff in general. I care about Earth, about protecting people here. But Light, you're not a threat to Earth. You're not trying to blow up the planet or enslave humanity or any of the things I usually deal with. You're trying to reorganize how humans interact with each other, make them follow rules through fear. That's internal stuff. That's something humans need to figure out for themselves." "I am human," Light snapped, the words escaping before he could stop them. "I'm one human, using the tools available to me to solve problems that humanity has failed to address for thousands of years. Why is that less significant than you punching aliens? Why does the method of violence determine whether something matters? I'm preventing more deaths, more suffering, than any of your battles ever did. The crime I've eliminated has saved countless innocent lives. Why doesn't that register as worth your serious attention?" Goku was quiet for a moment, and Light could see him genuinely trying to formulate an answer that would make sense. "I guess, because you're making people be good instead of helping them choose to be good. When I fight someone like Frieza, I'm stopping them from doing something they chose to do. They decided to be evil, and I'm preventing that evil from spreading. But you're killing people before they even have a chance to choose differently. And beyond that, you're making everyone else so scared that they can't really choose freely either. It's not the same thing as protecting people. It's more like controlling them." "Control is protection." Light's voice echoed through the empty observatory, louder than he'd intended, carrying a note of desperation he immediately hated himself for revealing. "People can't protect themselves from their own worst impulses. They can't create stable societies without someone establishing consequences severe enough to matter. What you call control, I call guidance. What you dismiss as fear, I recognize as necessary deterrence. And the fact that you can't, or won't, understand that difference says more about your limitations than mine." "Maybe," Goku acknowledged. D in the easy agreement somehow stung more than argument would have. "I'm not as smart as you, definitely not as educated. There's probably a lot of complicated philosophy I don't get. But Light, I've met a lot of people who thought they needed to control others for their own good. Frieza thought he was bringing order to the universe. King Piccolo thought he was establishing proper hierarchy. Zamasu, this guy from another timeline, thought mortals were so flawed that gods needed to wipe them out and start over. They all had reasons that made sense to them, and they were all wrong. The comparison to villains, to destroyers and tyrants and murderers, should have made Light angry, should have provoked the righteous fury of God being compared to common criminals. But instead, it just made him feel tired, because he could see the pattern Goku was describing, could recognize the template of justified atrocity that Light had always told himself he was different from. And the fact that Goku saw them as the same, saw no meaningful distinction between Kira and the monsters he'd fought, meant that all of Light's philosophical sophistication, all his careful reasoning about the necessity of his methods, registered to someone with broader perspective as just more of the same self-deluding evil. "I need you to acknowledge what I am," Light said, and now he wasn't even trying to hide the plea in his voice. "Not agree with me, not endorse my methods, just recognize that I'm not ordinary, that I've transcended normal human limitations, that I've achieved something unprecedented. You fought gods and monsters and beings from other timelines. You exist on a level beyond normal reality. I'm asking you from that perspective to confirm that I'm not just another deluded human with a weapon, that there's something genuinely different about what I've become." Goku looked at him for a long moment, and Light saw something like pity in those dark eyes. "Light," he said gently, "you're a really smart human who found a really powerful tool. That's all you are. The notebook made you dangerous, but it didn't make you a god. And I think deep down you know that. I think that's why you're here, why you've been so obsessed with getting me to fight you or fear you or acknowledge you as special. Because if someone like me, someone who actually does exist outside normal human limitations, if I validated your godhood, maybe you could finally believe in it yourself." The words struck like physical blows, each one precisely targeted to the vulnerabilities Light had spent years trying to armor over with philosophy and ideology. Because Goku was right. Light had been seeking validation, desperately needed someone whose power was unquestionable to confirm that Light's power was real too. That he wasn't just playing pretend, wasn't just a teenager with a notebook convincing himself he mattered. He'd built this entire confrontation around forcing Goku to see him as significant, as special, as worthy of serious consideration. And Goku's refusal to provide that validation, his gentle, patient insistence that Light was just human, was destroying Light more effectively than any death note ever could. "I've killed thousands of people," Light said, and his voice had gone hollow, all the passion and fury draining away into something bleak and empty. "I've manipulated governments, outsmarted the world's greatest detective, created a global movement that worships me as divine. I've done things that should be impossible for one person to accomplish. And you're telling me that none of that makes me special, that I'm still just ordinary." "Not ordinary," Goku corrected. "Definitely not ordinary. Most people couldn't do what you've done even if they had the notebook. But special in the way you want to be special. Different in a fundamental metaphysical way that puts you above other humans." He shook his head slowly. "No, you're exceptional at planning, at manipulation, at using the tools you have. But you're still human, Light. Still bound by the same basic limitations, the same mortality, the same need for meaning that drives everyone. The notebook gave you power, but it didn't change what you are." Light felt something inside him shatter, the sound of breaking inaudible but somehow deafening. All the careful construction, all the layers of identity he'd built on top of Light, Yagami the student to create Kira the god, it was collapsing inward, revealing the terrified boy underneath who'd never felt special enough, never felt important enough, never felt like he mattered in a world of 7 billion people unless he could elevate himself above them all. The Death Note had been supposed to prove his worthiness, to demonstrate that he deserved to be extraordinary, but Goku's assessment stripped that away, revealed the note for what it really was, not proof of Light's specialness, but compensation for his ordinariness. "Then what was it all for?" Light asked, and he could hear the brokenness in his own voice, could feel hot pressure building behind his eyes that he refused to acknowledge as tears. "If I'm not special, if I'm not fundamentally different, then all those deaths, all that sacrifice of my humanity, my peace, my chance at a normal life, it was for nothing. I'm just a murderer with delusions of grandeur, a smart kid who found a weapon and convinced himself that using it made him a god." Goku's expression was deeply sad, and when he spoke, his voice carried genuine compassion that somehow hurt more than mockery would have. "I don't know if it was for nothing. Maybe some of the people you killed really were irredeemable, really did need to be stopped. And maybe the fear you created did prevent some crimes, saved some lives. I'm not wise enough to calculate whether the good outweighed the bad. He took a step closer, and Light found he couldn't move away, couldn't break from that earnest, pitying gaze. But Light, you didn't need to become a god to make a difference. You're brilliant. You could have been a prosecutor, a detective, a reformer. Could have worked within systems to make them better, or worked outside them to build new ones. You had so many options for using your intelligence to help people. But you chose the one that required you to be above everyone else, that let you play God without having to actually do the hard work of being human. The observation was so accurate, so perfectly targeted to the truth Light had been avoiding since the day he picked up the Death Note, that it bypassed all his defenses and struck directly at his core. Because Goku was right. Light had never wanted to work within systems, had never wanted to collaborate or compromise or accept the slow, grinding progress of collective human effort. He'd wanted to be special, to be singular, to stand alone at the pinnacle of human achievement and look down at everyone else from heights they could never reach. The Death Note had offered him that, and he'd seized it with both hands, had sacrificed everything and everyone in pursuit of validation that he now realized would never come. Because validation from others, even from someone as powerful as Goku, couldn't fill the void inside him, couldn't answer the fundamental question that had driven everything. Did Light Yagami matter? Was his existence significant? Did the universe care that he was alive? The Death Note had been supposed to prove the answer was yes, that Light mattered enough to reshape civilization, to judge the living and condemn the wicked, to stand in place of God himself. But all it had really proven was that Light was so desperate for significance that he'd kill thousands of people just to feel important. I can't go back, Light said quietly, and it wasn't a statement of defiance but of simple recognition. Even if you're right, even if everything I've done was just elaborate compensation for feeling ordinary, I can't undo it. Can't return those lives, can't erase Kira from existence, can't go back to being Light Yagami the student and pretend none of this happened. I've gone too far, become too committed to this path. There's no redemption available, no way to make this right. Goku was quiet for a moment, then said something Light didn't expect. You could stop. Right now today you could decide that Kira ends here. It wouldn't fix what you've done, wouldn't bring anyone back, but it would prevent future harm. That's something. And maybe over time you could find ways to actually help people, really help them, not through fear and death, but through the kind of positive work you should have been doing all along. It wouldn't make you special or elevate you above other humans, but it might make your life matter in ways that actually satisfy, instead of just leaving you constantly hungry for more validation. The suggestion should have been appealing. Light could see the logic of it, could recognize that Goku was offering him an exit, a chance to step away from the abyss before he fell completely. But the thought of giving up Kira, of returning to ordinariness, was so viscerally terrifying that Light felt nauseous. Because without Kira, without the Death Note and the identity he'd built around it, what was he? Just Light Yagami. Just another smart kid in a world full of smart kids. Destined for a comfortable but unmemorable life, for modest successes that would be forgotten within a generation, for the kind of insignificance that felt worse than death. I can't, Light said, and felt the admission like a confession of ultimate weakness. I need this. Need to be Kira, need to be important, need to matter in ways that ordinary humans don't. Even knowing its compensation, even recognizing that it's not real godhood, I can't give it up. The alternative, being ordinary, is unbearable. And there it was, the truth that Light had been dancing around for weeks, that all his philosophical justifications and careful reasoning had been constructed to avoid. He was addicted to the feeling of power, to the illusion of significance the Death Note provided. The new world, the justice, the vision of paradise without crime, those were just narratives he'd told himself to make the addiction seem noble. The real motivation had always been simpler and more pathetic. Light Yagami was so afraid of being ordinary that he'd murder thousands of people rather than accept his own human limitations. Goku looked at him with an expression of deep sorrow. Then I feel bad for you, he said simply. Because that means you're trapped, caught in something you can't escape even though it's destroying you. And I don't know how to help with that kind of trap. It's not something I can fight or punch away. It's inside you, part of how you see yourself and the world. All I can do is tell you that being ordinary isn't as terrible as you think. That there's value in just being human, in connecting with other humans, in working together towards something good. But if you can't hear that, can't accept it. He trailed off, shaking his head. Then what? Light asked, voice raw. You'll kill me, stop me, finally take Kira seriously enough to oppose. No, Goku said, and the word carried finality. I'll just feel sad that someone so smart, with so much potential, chose to waste it on something that'll never give him what he's looking for. And I'll hope that eventually, maybe after you've hurt enough people or caused enough damage or just gotten tired enough of chasing validation that never comes, you'll make a different choice. He started to turn away, then paused. The thing is, light, being acknowledged as special won't fix what's broken in you. Even if I fought you, even if I treated you like a serious threat, even if I proclaimed you a god, you'd still feel empty inside, because the emptiness isn't about external recognition. It's about not liking who you are when you're alone with yourself. And no amount of power or worship or divine status will change that. Light watched Goku walk away, his orange gi gradually disappearing into the darkness beyond the observatory, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. Not redemption, not transformation into something better, but a cold crystallization of exactly what he'd become. He was Light Yagami, holder of the Death Note, Kira the god of the New World. And he was also a broken human being, terrified of insignificance, addicted to power, incapable of accepting his own ordinariness. Both things were true simultaneously, and the cognitive dissonance between them was excruciating. But Light had learned to live with excruciating things, had learned to function despite the constant psychological weight of thousands of deaths, despite the isolation of holding absolute power, despite the knowledge that everyone who loved him loved a fiction he'd constructed to hide his true self. He could learn to live with this too, the knowledge that Goku was right, that his godhood was compensation rather than reality, that he was ordinary in the ways that mattered most. Could live with it and continue anyway, because stopping was still unthinkable, because being ordinary was still unbearable, because the Death Note was the only thing standing between Light Yagami and the crushing awareness of his own insignificance. Ryuk materialized beside him, watching Goku's retreating form. Well, the Shinigami said, his voice unusually subdued. That was brutal. I've watched a lot of humans break under various pressures, but I've never seen someone get destroyed so thoroughly without a single blow being struck. That Saiyan's dangerous in ways I didn't anticipate. He didn't destroy me, Light said, but his voice lacked conviction. He just revealed what was already broken, and knowing something's broken doesn't mean you can fix it. Sometimes you just have to keep functioning anyway, incorporating the damage into how you operate going forward. Is that what you're doing? Ryuk asked, incorporating the damage and moving forward. Light looked down at his hands, ordinary hands, human hands, not the hands of a god, and felt the weight of the Death Note in his jacket pocket. I don't have a choice, he said quietly. This is who I am now. This is what I've become. And whether it's compensation or divinity or just elaborate self-delusion, it's all I have. He looked up at the stars overhead, at the vast, indifferent universe that didn't care whether Light Yagami existed or not. So yes, I'm moving forward. Because the only alternative is accepting that everything I've done was meaningless, and I'm not strong enough to face that truth. Ryuk laughed, but it sounded sad. You know what's funny? You finally got what you wanted. Someone powerful enough to validate or challenge your godhood gave you their honest assessment. And it turns out honesty was the cruelest thing he could have offered. Maybe that's the real lesson here. Sometimes the worst thing that can happen isn't being opposed or destroyed, but being understood. Light didn't respond. He just stood in the empty observatory, broken but still standing, ordinary but still claiming divinity, human but refusing to accept humanity. The confrontation was over, and Goku had won without ever fighting. But Light would continue being Kira anyway, because continuing was easier than acknowledging what Goku had seen so clearly, that Light Yagami had never been special at all, and all the Death Notes in all the worlds couldn't change that simple, devastating truth. The power had only worked because people believed in it, but Light had always known, in the deepest parts of himself that he'd spent years trying to silence, that he didn't believe in it at all. He just believed that pretending was better than the alternative, and now even that small comfort had been stripped away, leaving only the pretense and the terrible awareness that it was pretense and the commitment to continue pretending anyway. Because that's what ordinary people did when they couldn't accept being ordinary. They broke without being touched, shattered from the inside out, and kept performing godhood because the performance was all they had left.